Right. So welcome everybody. Good morning. Welcome to YAI's 2024 New York City Autism Conference. We have people tuning in virtually to today's conference, as well as people joining us here in person. And we're glad that all of you are here with us. My name is Xiaomei Gao, and I'm the director of YAI Link, the Information and Referral Department for YAI. A brief visual description of me. I am a Chinese American woman with black hair in a ponytail. I'm wearing a beige blazer and I am standing behind a white podium in a conference room with white walls and a large screen. We're excited that you are joining us today as we present Beyond Barriers, Advancing Autism Advocacy in Schools. Today, you will hear from people with autism, parents, and service providers about their experience in the special education system and how we can all work to advance autism advocacy in schools. They will share their experience, knowledge, and tips so that we can all work to support students with autism in creating the educational experience that best meets their needs. A note about person first and identity first language. Today, you will hear some speakers use identity first language, such as an autistic person, and person first language, such as a person with autism. While I respect that people choose to identify differently when it comes to their diagnosis. Here at YAI and our affiliates, our mission is to offer children and adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities a range of services. We are committed to seeing beyond disability, providing opportunities for people to live, love, work, and learn in their communities. A little history for those that are not familiar with YAI, founded in 1957. YAI provides supportive housing, education, medical, dental, and mental health care, job training, community integration, and social enrichment services for more than 20,000 people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families throughout New York State, New Jersey, and California. If you have questions about YAI services, you can call YAI Link at 212-273-6182 or email us at link@yai.org. So let's review our schedule for today. Today's conference will feature a panel beginning soon at 9:45 or a few minutes later, since we started a few minutes later. The panel, Navigating the Special Education System, It's a Journey, will be moderated by Catherine Hoy, Director of Advocacy Services at AHRC New York City. Catherine will be joined by panel members Nicholas Lasantra, President of the YAI Long Island Self-Advocacy Group, Tamara Farrell, Autism Parent Advocate, and Susanna Montes, a parent advocate. Panel members will share their experience with special education, the IEP process, and offer tips for students with autism and parents about knowing their rights, navigating the special education and the transition process. Following our panel, we will have a 15-minute break beginning at 10:45. At 11 a.m., we are excited that Guy Stevens, founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint, will join us virtually. Guy's presentation, Misunderstood, Shifting from a Punitive Mindset, will look at how children are often punished in the name of their behavior, and he will discuss how a trauma-informed and neuroscience-aligned lens on behavior can reduce and eliminate punitive practices. The virtual portion of the conference will end at 12:15 p.m., and our in-person attendees will gather for lunch, networking, and creative art facilitated by the artists from YAI Arts. The in-person conference will conclude at 1:30 p.m. Today's conference is supported by New York City Council, but it is also supported by YAI. YAI relies on a variety of fundraising events throughout the year. Our largest event, the Central Park Challenge, or CPC for short, will be held on Saturday, June 1st. During the CPC, we celebrate people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. This year's CPC will feature many fun activities and will be an accessible event with adaptive games and an adaptive clothing closet with inclusive junior races. We would love for you to join us on Saturday, June 1st in Central Park. Visit centralpark.org for more information and to register. Today's conference is sponsored in part by the New York City Council's Autism Initiative. Our City Council has supported New Yorkers with autism and their parents and caregivers throughout this important initiative since 2007, and YAI is extremely grateful for their support. If you live in New York City, please take the time to contact your local council member and thank them for supporting Autism Initiative that funds events such as this. Visit yai.org/advocacy for more information. We also wanted to share our excitement that this fall, YAI will hold its 20th Latino Conference. This important conference, presented entirely in Spanish, will be a celebration of the Latino community, with speakers sharing their knowledge and experience supporting people with developmental disabilities. As we lead up to Latino, look out for a range of 20 different activities that will culminate in our celebration on October 11th, 2024. We hope that you can join us. We want to also thank an additional sponsor for today's conference, the Center for Independence of the Disabled, New York Connect program, Sydney for short. The New York Connect program is a free place to call for information about benefits, resources, and services that support people with disabilities. They work with New Yorkers of all ages and with any type of disability. YAI is grateful for Sydney and New York Connect support. Visit sydney.org for more information. A few reminders for today's conference. We encourage you to complete our feedback survey at the end of the conference. In-person attendees can scan the QR code located at the tables in the conference space, and virtual attendees can click on the link we will provide you in the chat. The feedback survey helps YAI to continue to improve on trainings that we provide at events such as this. Also, if you need attendance certificate for today's conference, you will need to complete the feedback survey, and once it's done, you will be given the option to have a certificate emailed to you. Our conference is being recorded and will be available at yai.org/Autism Conference in the coming weeks. So please feel free to share it with others who are not able to join us today. An additional reminder for in-person attendees, please put your phone on silent, and we ask that if you need to take a call to step out into the hallway in order to make sure that everyone can hear our presenters. Asking questions. After our presenter and Guy Stevens' presentation, you will be able to submit questions for our presenters. For our virtual attendees, you can click on the Q&A icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen and submit your questions for the presenters. Our in-person attendees can raise their hand if they have questions, and we will bring a microphone over to you to ask your question. We will do our best to get to all of the questions. Our virtual attendees will see in that the chat information posted in the conference and links that we want to share with you. Now I have the pleasure of introducing our first presentation, Navigating the Special Education System. It's a Journey. It's a panel presentation moderated by Catherine Hoy, who's the Director of Advocacy Services in AHRC, New York City. Kate oversees a team of non-attorney advocates who represent hundreds of individual students and families seeking appropriate educational services in New York City each year. She is the co-chair of the Queens Council on Developmental Disabilities Children's Committee, a member of the Arise Coalition, and a founding member of the Transition Alliance, a new group focused on improving secondary outcomes and opportunities for youth with disabilities. Kate regularly works with regional councils and stakeholders in New York City and state to advocate for rights of students and their families. Kate graduated from Bryn Mawr College and Fordham University's Graduate School of Social Services and is a trained mediator and a licensed social worker in New York State. Kate is proudly and joyously neurodivergent. Please join me in welcoming Kate and all of our panel members.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Thank you, YAI. It is such a pleasure to be here today, and just wanted to turn to the audience here. We're going to be online and in person, and so I wanted to be able to see my panel as well. We're so excited to welcome today Nick Licatena, president of the Long Island Self-Advocacy Group, Susana Montes, who is a parent of an incredible young man, and Tamara Farrell, another parent of an incredible young man. I've had the opportunity and the pleasure of working with Tamara and Susana, and it has been, again, as we all heard, it's been a journey. So we're going to talk about that journey today. And one of the things that came out whenever we started this conversation was we were talking initially about some of the specifics in navigating special education, but what sort of started to, the thread that pulled as we talked a little longer was really more of the self-development, the self-awareness that grows out of this journey of accepting and celebrating autism and what it is to be a person, an autistic person, or to have a child with autism. So we're going to talk about that today, and we would love to also share that conversation with you. I am a white Caucasian woman with blonde hair. I'm middle-aged. I'm wearing a rust-colored sweatshirt and glasses, and I'm going to turn it over to our panel to introduce themselves as well. So, panel, Nick, why don't we start with you? Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us also, yeah, go ahead.
I'm Nicholas Lacentra. I am on the autism spectrum. I was diagnosed since I was 18 months old, and I am a white with dark brown hair and dark brown eyes.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Happy to be here. I am a Latino, middle-aged woman. I have a ponytail. I wear glasses. I have a black blazer, and I have underneath like a old navy T-shirt. I am the parent of a young adult living with autism, and I'm happy to be here and looking forward to our conversations. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tamara. I am a Black woman. I am dark skinned. I have medium length, black or brown hair, depending on the day. I have a sleeveless brown shirt, and I'm in my late 30s. And I am a parent to a young man with autism, and it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much.
Welcome, everyone. And I just want to make sure that you can hear us and everyone online can hear us. So you'll just let us know. It might be, wondering, easier to pass the mic, but okay. We'll find out. All right, so let's jump in. Nick, what do you like about being autistic?
So for me, being autistic is great and very fun, but it's also very hard at the same time. Because growing up, I had a lot of struggles in my life. And when you are a kid, it's a tough time being a kid with autism. But as you grow up, you get better and you progress more.
Okay, and we're going to talk about that journey a little bit today, what it's like to grow up being a kid.
Of course, yeah.
Right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your life like?
Oh boy. I used to be a little aggressive when I was very younger. I learned something personal and channeled my aggressions into advocacy. And growing up as an adult though, I helped find other autistic adults who understood me very well. And especially in 2020 where I found YAI, the self-advocacy part, because I joined YAI in 2019, the same year I graduated high school too, so, yeah.
So it's, when I know we're gonna talk about it, that's really interesting. It's that community. As you got older, you found a community of other self-advocates as well,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. So Tamara, what do you like about being the parent of an autistic young man?
It's amazing. It's amazing. He was diagnosed at 3. I knew something was wrong because he started talking and then he stopped. So I took him to his pediatrician and she, referred me, and I went to the Kennedy Center, and it was just, they gave me that diagnosis. And at 3 years old, I think it's kind of hard to diagnose a child with, whether it's going to be mild, moderate, or severe. But they told me he would be severely autistic. They gave him so many limitations, and watching him surpass, and some of the things that they said he wouldn't be able to do, he does it effortlessly. Like he's gonna be 20 in July. He has a job. He's been to Jamaica. He has a passport. I didn't even have a passport at 18. I'm just like, wow. And so, he loves helping people. It's just amazing watching him grow into this individual, especially when they said all the odds were against him. And he knocked them down every step of the way. And we always have challenges every day, whether you're on the spectrum or whether you're not, you're going to have challenges. But to watch him supersede those challenges, it's just very I have an overwhelming amount of joy, and I'm proud to be his mom.
I love it. Susanna, and I want to make sure we hear you online too. But tell us about what it's like to be a parent of young man with autism.
To be the mother of a child or young adult on the spectrum, it represents a lot of work, but at the same time, it represents a lot of satisfaction. Seeing this person that really worries like about others, sometimes even more than about himself. So that, for me as a parent, is a given. It's a gift. It's good to see a person that wants other around him to be okay, to feel happy, to be connected. And the second point, what brings it brings a community of amazing people like most of us here. So those two characteristics are like amazing, like having a child on the spectrum.
So it's a community.
The community, and also like being around a person that wants others to be happy and to be, like in a good space at all times. That's just like, we live in times that sometimes people don't worry about others, but when you find that person worrying about you, that's really amazing. That's like it gets to your heart.
I see Nick, I see you smiling and nodding. What about that resonates with you?
Well,
Autistic people want other people to be happy, joyous. What was it about?
well, I would say they want to be happy in life.
Yeah.
Because if you have a parent right here, she's right here, by the way. She's parents struggle sometimes with autistic kids, but once you get older, you understand, and they become like your friends basically. So that's my experience with my relationship with my mother and myself.
Right. It's a journey, right?
It's a very good journey. It's rocky at first, but it becomes good at the end.
So it sounds like it's important, and I've heard this from everyone as we've been talking, patience.
Yes.
Okay. So let's talk about some of the things though on that journey that are bumpy, that are challenging. Tamara, what for you, what was really difficult about, not really difficult, we don't have to go to the darkest moments, but you can if you want. What was challenging about navigating special education process?
Well, what was difficult about navigating it? One was the diagnosis. I think that that's the worst news that you can get, especially as a first-time young parent. It was the lack of information. I didn't know where to go, who to talk to. I have other family members with, children with autism, but as time goes on, those services sometimes are obsolete or they advance. So I had to start from scratch. And with the lack of support, it was very difficult. And also, it just was a culture shock having a child with a disability. I was in school, I was in college, so a lot of times I had to miss class and try to figure out how can I juggle both. And so thankfully I had my mom, my brother, their, nieces and nephews, anybody who needed to babysit, they would babysit, but trying to get information of where to start. And his pediatrician at the time was very helpful. She gave me a referral to the Kennedy Center, and that's when things opened up for me. And then it was just doors just started opening, and I didn't know, I was praying because I didn't know what to do. I was just, I felt like I was by myself for the most part. You have the help, but you feel like you're going through this by yourself. And it's just like I would sit him there and we'd just be staring at each other because I'm just like, kid, are you gonna talk to me or I gotta figure everything out on my own? And eventually he started talking. And I was just like, okay, well, this helps. But then, once you get past that task, and then it's like you pass that, okay, and you have another task. And it's like when they enter school, and it's like they're not talking, so you're worrying about them while they're in school. You're praying to God no one does anything to your child because let's face it, these things happen. So it was a lot, and I had a village. That was the main thing. Like Susanna said, community, and that is the most important thing when you have children. Period. They said it takes a village to raise a child, and it's so true. And with that, um, I was very angry because I was just like, I'm 18, I'm having a baby. When he got diagnosed, I was about 20, 21, and I was just young. So I was doing everything with anger and aggression. And that is not how you can advocate for your child. That is not. So those were the challenges. When I would get past one challenge and thought I was home free, another challenge as they go from elementary school. You think you got that tackled, middle school. Middle school is a whole nother beast. Then when you get into high school is another beast. It's like now they're transitioning into young adulthood, more independent. And it's just like, okay, well, how do I navigate this? And it's like, it's important to have the school back you up with those things. Because I run into a lot of parents that don't know all of these services that are out there for their children. And that's what I advocate for. I think the hardest part is it's easy to advocate for other people's children and certain things because you've been through those things. But then now it's like when it's new for you. I think the most difficult thing for me in advocacy is when I can't advocate for my own child the way I need to. I think that's the hardest part. But yeah, it's just, and then you also have to deal with the teachers burnout.
Okay. Okay, and I there's a lot there.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot there. So it's that constant need for information. And you said earlier, there was the initial diagnosis and you were told, on a piece of paper or 100 pieces of paper, a lot of complex things about who your child was going to be. And he surpassed and exceeded that. And some of those things are, I'm sure, may be true, and some of them may never have been accurate, right? But as a parent, you're navigating that as you go. Susanna, what about for you? What has been most challenging as you look back on your son's life and your process there?
Sure. I can remember like when he was 5 years old, turning 5, that was a very difficult time because, he was coming out of early intervention or CPSC, which tends to be a little bit more supportive.
Mm.
And, receiving a lot of services, you hoping, or at least that was me at that time, okay, when he's 5 years old, this is over. That's it. No more dealing with none of this. However, that was not the case. And it turned out to be very hard because then I needed to navigate a world that I had no clue. And I also wasn't expecting it because in my head, it was gonna be over, 5 years old, everything is fine, let me move on, let me just continue like most people do. Well, that was not the case.
Right.
And, I found it very hard because, my expectations and what's going on. And then, you have to deal with like so much information that you can hardly even process. So it was a very difficult time for me. And I realized, well, I'm gonna have to adjust. I don't know how because I'm struggling at that particular time, but I did learn as much as I could and I was able to navigate. But it was a very, very difficult time at that point.
Right. And we've talked a lot about that. You're in school, you have your own family, you're making decisions about prioritizing. Obviously, your children always come first, but it's constant learning.
Yeah, I think the hardest part is the adjustment, right? Because you have to adjust really fast. You don't have any time to soak or, uh, you have to push through tears. And it's very hard because that evaluation process is brutal alone. And so when you think, because you feel like when they turn 5, you feel like, okay, they turn 5, they get into school. This is going to be much easier. No, it's not. No, it's not. It's not easier.
I see, Nick. We talked about that. And can you tell us what's it like going through school?
Okay.
Yeah.
Things were a little challenging at first. Well, honestly, middle school was my worst time in my life because I was very aggressive, very angry at myself. I used to punch people like I said, until I got to a school where I found people that are like me, called Westbrook. Unfortunately, they closed down though as of last year of December.
I think there is one thing to say here too, and that is I hear from so many parents and kids. Too many of these really important programs are closing, and so it's important for us to continue advocating for special educators and special education. But what was it like when you got to that school? How did you do that? Do you know who helped you get into that right educational placement?
Well, right here,
Who's that? Who are you pointing to?
my mom.
Oh, and she helped you navigate the special education.
Oh yeah, she's been a big part of my life, and she's helped me out a lot too.
I think that's incredible. What was it like when you got to Westbrook? What was
Well,
different?
when I trialed there, I thought it was a very nice place. It was very different at the time. I started looking at the place. I thought it was pretty cool. I met some nice people there. Then when I started, I was a little aggressive again. But as I moved on and I grew up, I was 15 when I started Westbrook, and I have been in residential ever since for 7.5 years. So honestly, it can be a little tough at first. Once you get adjusted there, it's not that big of a deal. Because I was the longest student to live there for a while.
Do you think that schools are very good, or do they need some more help on helping? It's that adjustment period, right?
Yeah.
I hear that. What's that like? I think do you feel like people understand how much time autistic folks need to
I mean,
adjust?
it's like 50-50. Like some people, they understand you, but but the other half, they don't. And that really hurts me a lot. So,
Yeah,
you know,
we need more understanding.
yes, we do need more understanding. I like what you're going through that.
Yeah.
I like your point right there, Catherine. I mean, Kate, right?
Kate, Catherine, I'll answer to both. Yes. It's that lack of understanding, I think. We've talked about that, that there's need for more. It's a journey. We know clinicians are on a journey, right?
Mhm.
The understanding of autism has changed. There's more types of special education placements out there, but it's not perfect. I did want to take a moment because it came up during our conversations. You were talking about aggression, right?
Yeah.
And that anger. You were talking about anger. Tamara, tell me a little bit about that journey of anger or the feelings that come up.
For some odd reason, it's the first emotion you feel when you're not told something that you want to hear. And so I was very angry because I'm like, how do I navigate through all of this? I'm in school, I'm trying to work, I'm a teen parent. And so my mom was just like, it's gonna work itself out. But you don't want to hear that because you just like, that's not gonna work itself out. So I was so angry and I was going into these places and it was just like, it was bad. It was bad because I was not getting the results that I should have gotten if I went in there the right way. And so, and my son was seeing that. And I'm just like, I'm his first example. So if I'm showing anger, he's going to start showing anger. So I had to remove the emotion out of it and function off a base of logic.
Okay.
And once I started functioning off of logic and what's in front of me, this is the facts. He's autistic. That's not changing. That's not going anywhere. You can be as angry as you want to. Nothing is going to change that. So how about you change your perspective on it? And now when you go in there, you can go in there, let that anger drive you into researching. Let that anger drive you into when you go in there. I can be assertive without being nasty. And so once I started doing that, advocating for him came up. It was still challenging, but it wasn't because I was making it challenging. So sometimes we put more on us ourselves than we can bear. And once I removed that obstacle, I got better reception. It was more like, okay, well, let me help you. Because before it was like, I'm not helping you. You're an angry Black woman, and I'm just not going to help you. And we already have that stereotype, right? So I was like, yeah, I don't want to keep feeding into the stereotype of that. So once I changed that, things opened up. The anger was still there with certain things, but it was more of, you're not going to slight my child because he has a disability. And so once I start to feel that anger, I challenge it again, but I advocate stronger. I have help.
Okay.
I have help now.
Channeling the anger, it develops. Susanna, talk to us about your advocacy journey. How do you model advocacy?
Um, I like to really learn a lot because when I go to ask or like maybe need a service for my child, I'm gonna really like get to you with the knowledge. That's how I kind of channel my anger. And also I keep it very professional. I'm very professional. I try to keep it together because that's how I'm gonna get to what I need or what I need for my child. The other thing that I do is like, listen, everybody has a boss, everybody, So, like I try not to be, I go to the channel or, speak to the director, maybe to the supervisor, to the director and get to wherever I need to get. But I really try to keep it together as much as possible because the reality is that, if you're not being like professional, if you're not having like a good communication skills, they are going to ignore you. And I want to demonstrate like I need what I need, and I'm not asking because it's for me or because I want it. It is because it's what the child needs. I try to work with professionals as much as I can because at the same time, you need to build a team. You know, it's kind of funny. You know your child better than anybody else, but at the same time, if you want people to listen to you, you need a little team. You need a team of professionals saying that, okay, you know what? She's not saying it herself. She's not a therapist or she's not a professor or a teacher, but then she's talking to this team of professionals that are saying, oh yeah, the child needs X, Y, or Z. So basically, I use a lot of professionalism. I try to be very diplomatic. I get my team of professionals on my side. And then, it's really hard for not to deny what you're asking for because, it's not you per se, although that should be enough.
Yes.
But it doesn't happen. So you need to get your team together, your professionalism, your team of professionals, and also, like be the best person you can be, when it comes to talking to, let's say, a director, supervisor, and use the chain of channel. Everybody has a supervisor. That's how I do it.
I remember you saying also advocacy doesn't come.
Advocacy doesn't come naturally. The more you do it And the more you kind of like learn about it, the better you're gonna do it. Like I can tell you for me, like when I started this journey, I was afraid. I didn't even like to speak. But it gets to the point that I think seeing the what's just, what your child really needs to kind of make the progress that he needs, it helps you. It kind of gives you that power, oh, but look, if I ask for this, and then I have the proper documentation and the proper way of communicating, I get it. And something I always say to parents, parents have power. Parents have power. Never forget that. That is very powerful. Sometimes it's hard for us to believe it because, we may be feeling tired or we may be feeling like defeated because it's a lot to handle. But trust me, parents have power.
Amen. Um, eh, yeah, Nick, talk to us about power. What power do you have? Tell us about your advocacy over time. When did you become an advocate?
Okay. Well, I learned how to advocate at my school, Westbrook, like I said before.
Okay.
And there wasn't any classes. There was just like the staff, the ones who were in charge, they were teaching me how to advocate. And then I found YAI as like how to learn how to advocate and self-advocacy in Long Island.
Do you remember at school, and something we talked about was it would be good to have classes on advocacy?
Yeah, I know.
Right? Okay, yeah, And so everyone out there, hear us. We need more advocacy classes, more self-determination. How did
Yes.
your staff at school teach you? Do you remember?
Well, they asked if I guess if I don't advocate, I don't get what I want. You know what I'm saying?
Right. You got to put it out there.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So part of it is asking and
Yeah,
creating the space.
in a polite, professional way.
Okay. Again, we're channeling the strong emotions that I think we all feel. Probably everyone in this room feels. Right. And then making as clear as we can be, making an ask to someone in a position of power. And it sounds like also over time, though, the way that we try and try and try again, I don't know, has anyone ever gotten what they've asked for in the first time?
Oh, no.
No.
I don't think
Okay.
so for me either.
I think, I really believe that we all are advocates. We all have it in us. You just, for some, you just more, sometimes somebody have to pull it out of you. And you have to, it takes bravery to be able to say what people are afraid to say or do what some people are afraid to do. And once you become a parent, it brings the advocacy out of you. It brings it out of you. You don't have no training. You're just going because off of love and off of caring. And so it's a challenge. And you got anger, you have aggression, you have love, you have hurt, you have pain, you have all of those emotions in you that's pushing you to advocate. And over time, you start to learn we do need more trainings. And this is why I love that we have Nick here. See, we can all talk about the experience it is to have a child with autism. We always forget about the child with autism, the young adult with autism. We see these shows and it tells you, what it is to be autistic, like The Good Doctor. No one ever said that because you have autism that you can't be a doctor, that you can't be a lawyer. No one ever said that. But let's talk to them from their perspective. How are they feeling? We know how it feels to be slighted and we're not on the spectrum. Imagine how they feel. We don't have enough conversations of that. We don't have enough conversations of having autistic children and young adults advocate for themselves. Say, no, I don't like this, or you're doing this and it's not fair, or I need this. We have to fuel our children with that power, and we don't do that enough. The schools don't do that enough. They give us the power. Yeah, that's great. We already have that power. Now you can help us, be more polished with it, but give that power to the children. Give them that power because they need it. We're not going to be here forever. One day they're going to be alone in this world without their parents, and they're going to need that power still. So.
mic drop. Absolutely. Susanna, do you have anything to add to that? I mean, how your advocacy has changed over time or?
Definitely, my advocacy has changed over time, especially these last 4 years during this pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, unfortunately, the pandemic have brought a lot of like reduction of services. A lot of professionals had decided to change to other careers. So we had like difficulties finding services for our loved ones because unfortunately we don't have the professionals. But that doesn't mean by no chance that you're just gonna say, oh, sorry, there's no professionals. We're gonna leave it outside. We have to continue to advocate. And like, it means that you definitely need to connect more with that supervisor or that director of the program. It means that you're gonna have to really be holding people accountable because, it doesn't mean that because now we have this shortage of professionals or these services are no longer as easy or maybe as we were able to get it before the pandemic. It doesn't mean that. It just means that we're going to have to be really like very first advocates more than ever. And if that means, like writing letters to your congressmen or maybe your senators or your council members, it means that you're going to have to take your advocacy to a higher level and hold people accountable. If somebody is, like, let's say a supervisor tells you or director, okay, I'll give you an answer tomorrow morning. Well, guess what? You got to be calling tomorrow morning to follow up because most likely, unless you do that, you're not going to hear back. So definitely the advocacy has changed and most likely it's going to continue to change because of the level of need that we have in this world today's world.
The level of need is higher. The need for advocacy is higher. We all know there are staff shortages. We ask certainly that folks are talking to their legislators. Please let them know that these are important issues to you, special education, DSPs, right?
Yes.
The importance of our care staff, but also for parents and advocates that you gotta stay in their face.
Yeah.
COVID.
affected a lot of
Yeah,
us. Bill.
COVID has, I'm gonna say it, some people don't like to say it, COVID has made a lot of people lazy after a while.
I agree.
For some people had burnout. COVID made you see that, working all this time and, COVID made you see what's important, but it also, a lot of professionals left because of burnout, right? And then it made people lazy because it's like working from home, things got backed up. And so now when you call these places and it's like, well, because of COVID precautions, it's like, okay, well, COVID was in 2019. Not saying that COVID doesn't exist anymore, but those precautions that you still have there is making room for things to be backed up. So, and then now you have a shortage. So now children are regressing because of COVID. I think the worst thing in the world is for a child with special needs to regress and you don't know how to get them past that hurdle.
Mm.
And with that being said, COVID, if children was already regressing, it made it worse. And so now with that and burnout, it's like, how do we get past that? How do we get to where we was before COVID and before the regression, right? Teachers are leaving. They don't want to get the vaccine. They don't want to get vaccinated. So now they're finding other channels to either teach, advocate, or do other things. And it's if you don't know how to reach those professionals that were so good at their job before COVID and they done transition into something else, you're stuck. It's like you feel like you're stuck. So I think that how do you pick up the pieces from COVID is where I'm stuck at.
Okay.
That's where I'm at.
And Nick, you wanted to say something about that. Like, did something change during that period?
I mean, like, I can agree with Tamara because, COVID made a lot of people lazy and I just don't like that at all. Because I want to get a job and I want to work too.
Okay. And you feel like there's not as many opportunities because.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So, it's important to talk about. We need more opportunities for parents, for youth. We know there's an issue with special education retention of staff. Again, encouraging everyone, please, right now we're in the state budget process. Please talk to your legislators. Please advocate for EI, special education, for all of the related service providers. I can't help but plug. Please call your legislators and ask for a DSP wage enhancement. We need staff. We need people who can stay in the position. But echoing, how are we doing on time? Okay, great. What am I doing with my audio here?
Nothing. I think it's just they're close together.
I think it's just technical difficulties, I think.
All right.
All that stuff.
It's one thing, COVID's made us better at some of this stuff. Sometimes,
I agree.
right? It made things more accessible.
Yes, it did.
Okay, I mean, again, we're not talking about that, don't worry, we're not getting. All right, so we talked about what we wish people had done differently. Advocacy emerges from these moments of greatest need, right? And we are all on a journey of our advocacy, channeling the strong emotions into different tactic. You got to change it up. Try this, change it up. Not working, change it. Let's try something else. Try something new. Bring a team with us. Grow your community. Nick, you talk about the importance of your mom, right?
Yeah.
Of having someone in the room with you, but then you've taken over that mantle. So what has it been like stepping into your own journey of advocacy?
So, well, I've learned how to advocate a lot, and thanks to my mother, she's helped me advocate and learn how to advocate on my own too. You know what I'm trying to say?
You still get frustrated?
I do sometimes get frustrated if something I don't goes in my way. I don't get what I want, but I try to advocate and I keep on doing it.
Yeah, we don't give up.
I never give up.
I love that. There's a lot of agreement. Yes, never give up. All right, so let's talk about, we've talked about the stress, we've talked about the strong emotions, we've talked about burnout, we've talked about the importance of community persistence, but how do you actually take care of yourselves? Let's talk about some self-care. How do you, Tamara, what do you recommend to other folks who are going through this?
Well, for me, therapy is one. Gotta channel that aggression somewhere, right? Take it to the therapist. I go get massages. I journal. I have to get it out. You know, when you don't get what you want, like Nick said, that anger is there, right? So you got to get it out some way. And so journaling has been great for me. I pamper myself because I can't pour from an empty cup. So I have to keep myself refilled and motivated. So I take time for myself. If I had a heavy week, I take a Friday off, Friday, Saturday, Sunday off, and then I get back Monday and I'm refreshed. I make sure that I take care of me first because I'm no good to no one else if I don't take care of me. So yeah, I think that being able to vent to my therapist is the best thing. You know, when you can't say what you really want to the person that's not giving you what you need, it's just like, okay, got my therapist on speed dial. She gonna hear this. And so it definitely, it helps. It really helps. I go to the nail salon, whatever's gonna make me happy, whatever's gonna give me that pick me up so that I can go back next and not feel overwhelmed and heavy. That's what I do.
Yep. How about you, Susanna?
I definitely like to take care of myself. It's really important. I have a very busy life. So I listen to classical music. That's the thing that I do because it brings a lot of peace. And it's very easy. You know, I just have to put it on my phone. Anywhere where I am, I can just let me plug on my classical music and listen to it. It relaxes me. It calms my body, calms my brain. I also like to walk by the river. I actually work in an area that I have an easy river and I go there. I was actually there on Tuesday, this past Tuesday for like 1 hour. And it's really like relaxing. And it's like, it calms my body. It makes me happy. It renews my energies. Like when I leave, I'm like, okay, I'm Wonder Woman again. I also have a friend, a good friend that we have been friends for like over 20 years. And we talk a lot on the phone, and sometimes we plan things together. Like, for example, this coming Saturday, we're going to a Broadway musical. Uh, we do that a lot. Basically, we find things, I find things to kind of motivate me, to make me happy, to calm my body, to calm my brain, because I always have a lot of things on my head. And if my brain is like full of things, like I'm not even able to think well, to process information. And then, to be honest, when I come back to what I have to do, I feel full of energy and I feel like, okay, I can do this. It motivates me a lot.
I love it. These are great suggestions. Nick, what do you do to relax?
I like to play video games. That calms me down a lot. And if I'm in the mood to play some like video game, I just plug it in. I also have some drawings I brought in today if anybody wants to take a look at it.
I think we would love to see them. Do you mind if afterward people, do you want to, show us? some
Yeah,
afterward
sure.
people
Let me
can
just
look?
give this to you really quickly. Thank you, Susanna. Those are my completed artwork. And over here, this is just not laminated artwork. So I do this a lot of my time. I draw a lot and I scan a lot of I have a lot of nostalgic like artwork basically. I don't know if anybody knows the word nostalgia.
Tell us about it.
It's like throwbacks from like your childhood and reminds you from the past. Like, that's good memories.
Danger Mouse.
Yes. Ninja Turtles is my favorite. And so is Power Rangers.
So it's video games, art.
Yeah, it's great art. And fun fact, I never had any negative complaint about my artwork so far. So it's a good thing though.
These are amazing. Do you mind if afterwards we'll take a look?
Yeah, sure, that's fine.
Okay, I'd love to take it. So,
Thank you.
okay, so we take care of ourselves. Advocacy takes a lot, right? There's a lot of emotion. And I know that as a neurodivergent person also, it's not always apparent when you need a break.
There you go.
Or, you put your full self out there and then it might take another day to recover. We don't always have that time, but whatever it is, that walk by the river, I have to say, hearing about just getting a massage, journaling or venting, those, couple hours you can spend playing a video game, they really help you to reset and it's critical.
I agree.
Right? That reset. So it's important. You have to make time for it. Even when you don't have time, you have to make time
Yeah,
for it.
exactly.
So,
That's
okay,
better.
let's try this. Nick, what do you wish teachers and special educators knew?
They need to be more patient and they need to understand that you're an autistic kid. Either it's a son or it's a male or a female. If you have a son or a daughter, you have to respect them. As a teacher, though.
As a teacher should spend more time seeing things from the perspective of an autistic kid.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you really talked about that. You feel like there's something, you're not quite there yet. We have a farther way to go in terms of our understanding for teachers. Is that right?
Yes.
I think it's a really important message for all of us. That with all the expertise, with all the education, and we know our teachers are putting, I think for most, 150% out there every day, there's still a lot of learning to do to really embrace.
I agree. I
Right.
totally agree with you.
That autistic kid. Okay. Great recommendation. And we're kind of winding down our tip section, but for Susanna and Tamara, what do you wish special educators or folks in special education knew? What can they do better?
For me, I think it is important to meet the child where the child is at. Also, we need to believe in their ability. It's hard to, like, if you don't provide that confidence that you can do it, even for us adults, like before we started this meeting, Kate told us we're going to do fine. And that kind of like, okay, that changes the whole attitude. So really believing in our children is important. We need to transmit that. You have to really let them know you can do this. Go ahead, try your best and you're going to get it done. So I feel those two things are really important, like meet them where they are and definitely believe in them. It's really important to believe in it, even us, as grown-ups. Believing in us is important as well, but if you transmit that to a child, it's going to be better.
Tamara.
Um, what do I would like teachers and educators and advocates? I sit and I do a lot of trainings. And when I do these trainings, I feel like you sit in a training for one day, especially like the IEP training, very hard training, right? You're not going to learn the IEP in one day, in 1 hour. That is going over your head. And so it's like, yeah, I went to this training and I went for one day and an hour worth of information. I know all about IEPs. That is not going to happen. I feel like you need to be consistent with these trainings. IEPs are not easy to learn. I have teachers that are friends of mine. They're like, that was a hard thing. Some of them had to teach themselves because the trainings was just whoop, going over their head. Another thing, I think that the school system needs to spend more time explaining to parents the process. There's not enough explaining. Sometimes you gotta walk them hand, hold their hand through the process because it's hard and it's always changing and it's always something developing. And autism is not one size fit all. You group the kids together. Everyone is different. Everyone is not gonna go through the same thing. Like my son never stacked things up like that's understand what I'm saying? So when you put children in a box and say, well, this is what autism is and this is what your child, that's not what it is. And so what if that parent don't experience those things that you said and now they need help with this situation and they don't have enough of that. And I think that we need more trainings, more help along the way of the process of what that is, getting their child into school, getting to that next level. Yeah.
I think one thing that came out also of our conversations was a lot of our trainings are just, as you said, way too many slides, too much information, too fast. We want to get it all in there and it's just too much. So we need to take it down. A lot of autistic folks that I work with have been saying that to me recently, and neurodivergent folks with intellectual disabilities saying, it's just too much. Sometimes one of the tips that I've gotten recently was answer the question that was asked. Don't tell me everything I could ever need to know, and just take it down a notch, right? It's overwhelming. There's a lot going on. You guys have said that today.
Oh,
There's
yeah,
a lot
of
going
course.
on, right?
Mhm.
Nick, what do you wish that teachers, special educators knew? Oh, you said this. Sorry.
It's okay, don't worry about it.
Okay,
But I'll give you my final word though.
go for it.
Respect people that are autistic.
I don't think there's anything else to say.
That's all I have to say. Like you have to respect your person. Somebody who's autistic on the spectrum, you have to respect them. You can't give them any like bull crap, honestly.
Because they won't stand for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think that's too often we talk in jargon and we need to be more direct.
You should.
Yeah,
How is that microphone not doing that all the time?
I don't know. Tamara, Susanna, did you have a final word?
Sure. I definitely would like to tell everyone, we need to hold people accountable. If you do that, your child is gonna have a better life. Thank you.
Um, my final word is advocacy is very fulfilling. When I run into people, parents, and they tell me, you helped me and my child is in this school or I got these services, I feel like I'm making a difference, not just for my child, but for other families. And ask for help, ask for guidance. Because you're gonna need it. You can't do everything on your own. Um, quick little tidbit. I was trying to advocate for my child, and on his IEP, it said he was getting all these therapies. I went to a parents teacher conference, and the teacher said without saying, your child is not getting these services. So I'm like, well, I want to meet with all the therapists. And she's just like, yeah, no, it's not the therapist. He's not getting it. And I was just like, what? So I went to, I don't know who I was talking to. I was at AHRC. He was having art therapy. And the art therapist recommended Kate Hoy. And so she said, you need an educational advocate. She was like, Kate Hoy is the education, she's the best. So I emailed Kate and I seen that it was like this long waiting list. I was like, this is going to take forever. Kate emailed me like a week later. She emailed me a week later and we had our IEP meeting and she was there. IEP meetings is usually like, I want to say like 20 to 30 minutes. We was in there for 2 hours because they were not doing anything they were supposed to do. And I am fuming because I'm like, I'm here all the time and y'all telling me, I said, I'm gonna let Kate do it because if I do it, they're gonna throw me out of here. By the time we were done, they was throwing everything at my son. He was getting all his services. The principal said, well, that's the longest IEP meeting I've ever seen. I said, yeah, that's what happens when you don't do what you're supposed to do. And because of that, Kate, you don't know that, but this made me want to be an advocate even more. Working with Kate is just amazing. And so ever since then, I would run into parents and I'm like, you need an educational advocate. Here's Kate. So I'm like, I hope I'm not overwhelming her, but you're amazing at what you do. And for that, you motivate parents like me, Susanna, children with young adults with special needs like Nick, want to advocate and do this work because people like you motivate us. And keep doing what you're doing because you're doing a great job. And some days when we feel like we're not doing enough or we are down, just know that people like us learn from you and we look to you. So thank you so much for all that you do.
I don't. The one reason that we're all here today is because parents got together and started these organizations 75 years ago. And so thanks to parents and to folks with autism, Nick, leading the way. You're all leaders. You all have your own advocacy groups now. You're sharing the wealth and the knowledge of parents. So, and John May knows this, we started together advocating as well with the family. So we're all on our journey, all of us here. And we can't wait to be on that journey with you as well. Thank you to the panelists. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much. And I was going to say, I can attest to that, Tamara, because I started in this field as a MNC back in the day, that's care managers. And Kay and I would take buses in Northern Queens because buses were more available. And we would go to all of these CSE offices to advocate for families, and just witnessing and just sitting by in the room with Kate, just seeing her advocacy work really motivated me as a caseworker back then. So I just wanted to share my attestation. Thank
Walk into a closet. Thank
And
you.
I can second all of that myself because I need on her shoes.
I feel like I'm on candid camera.
She asked me to be here and I couldn't say no.
Yes.
Because I'm gonna say no to Kate.
Yeah.
She's amazing.
I'm a firm believer in giving people their flowers when they deserve it.
You do. YI, thank you. Thank you to YAI for this opportunity. Yes, no, it's been a pleasure. Do we have any questions?
So I just want to just quickly say thank you to all of the panel members. I think we really appreciate you all sharing your personal experience and being vulnerable and giving us tips and advices from your personal experiences. So we're grateful for that. So let's get to some questions. Do we have any in-person attendees who have questions? We can walk over and give you the microphone. You can just raise your hand. I know we have a few questions coming in online.
Any last chance, any in-person questions before we get to online? No? And if you still think of one, we'll ask them. Okay. Okay. I'm coming back to you. All right. First in-person question. Go for it.
I went to the Central Park Challenges last year. I remember me at the YI Cook Garden and YI Manhattan.
You going to share the seat?
Yes. Yeah.
We'll see you there.
Yeah.
Just a little plug for the Central Park Challenge from YAI. Go ahead.
Yes. I have a question regarding advocacy. We have been training our kids and telling them be a good advocate, and we want them to do that. But sometimes our kids advocate for something that we as parents feel that they should not be advocating for. In what way can we, how will I put it? Can we reach out to our kids and tell them that maybe they should do something else? Because my son advocates for himself and he wants to make the wrong decision. And I like advocacy. And I like he's taking his stand to say, I want to do something. But sometimes I think that sometimes it's not really, there are some conflicting things about advocacy. You want them to do something, sometimes they choose the wrong thing. So how do you solve that problem?
Yeah. So I like your question. Maybe there's kids that want to advocate too. So, it'll take time for them to advocate, but when they get older, they'll advocate even more. Everybody know what I'm saying? I have made a lot of bad decisions in my life. I'm not gonna get into any detail though, but
I think part of it is let's hear from parents, but I think if you made good decisions, you ever made good decisions?
I have, yes, frequently. I have made plenty of good decisions in my life. Your turn.
Well, my son is still young, but I understand that we all make bad decisions at some points on our lives, and it's okay. I think we need to learn from those bad decisions as well. Everything is not gonna be perfect, and that's okay. We just have to kind of be there to support our kids and like maybe explain to them, like, maybe be a little bit more creative, bringing a therapist, just help the child to understand or the young adult to understand. Let us figure this out. Let us have more conversations about it. And if you still feel that way, then, unfortunately, sometimes we learn the hard way. I understand that we wouldn't want them to be, like in any type of trouble. But it's okay to allow them to make bad decisions. It's just part of growing up. And sometimes it's a way to learn. That's all I can say. Thanks.
I let Susanna answer first because Susanna seems to be a more mature parent than I am. I'm more laid back. But I have a young adult, and I was at first I was either my way or no way type of thing because I'm overprotective. But as they get older, you have to remember when we were young adults, when we were young, we wanted to do what we wanted to do, and our parents were there to, safeguard, say what was best, what was not. I think what you should do is sit down, have a conversation with your young child who's advocating for himself. Let them know that every decision you make has a consequence. And if you think that you can withstand those consequences, then okay. If you can't, let's find a different alternative. Because trying to not allow them to do it, either they're going to still do it and they're going to do it behind your back, and you don't want that. So try to find a medium. If you can, and if you can negotiate, and I find negotiating with kids sometimes is not a good thing, but if you can find that medium of saying, if we try it this way, let's see how that happens. And then you go from there. Yeah, having young adults who can advocate for themselves is very tough. It's difficult. It's a new journey. And you just have to have faith that what you've been instilling in them all this time will kick in, and it will go in your favor to some degree.
There's a lot of wisdom, a lot of love up here. And I also, for parents and for people in this community, we need each other. And I hope that folks will network today and stay in touch. The one thing I would also just recommend is supported decision-making. And the opportunity, if you can Google supported decision-making New York, even just having structured conversations around decision-making and who am I going to ask for help when it comes to conversations about finances or housing or relationships? putting some structure behind those thought processes can be really helpful for families and for folks with disabilities. But panel, thank you for that. Are there any other questions?
One here?
Hi. So I had a question. As a parent, I have 4 boys. 3 of them are diagnosed on the autism spectrum. At the beginning of the journey, how do you navigate? We don't really know much as like a newer family with younger children, how it was pre-COVID, but post-COVID, one of the things navigating Department of Education, I think they're going by New York City Public Schools now, is we run into a lot of educators, therapists, and what we know as professionals, who majority of the time, the answer is, I don't know, especially surrounding autism. As soon as they hear the diagnosis, it's kind of like a blockage, like, oh, we're not trained in that. We don't know, there's not enough information. And then, as you mentioned before, we run into what I call the box. So it's like, oh, autism, everything autism goes in the box. This is what we do when we have children that are diagnosed with autism. How do newer parents navigate that in terms of services? Because I do have a 4th grader who is more newly diagnosed, and I think we're at a point of the burnout that you talk about, because we're doing the care coordination, we're doing the services, we're doing all of the things that these professionals should be doing. I had a therapist say to me, he has autism, mom, he can't do it. And I was like, where is your level of training and education? Like, where did it start and why did it end? Because obviously it did, and it's where it should have continued, because it's a constant learning process. So at what point do we as parents, do we continue to just fight this system that is, I don't even know if it's a system, because most times it's like just a bunch of lines that are crossing and intersecting. That's how it feels. Or do you make the decision to just like pull in homeschool or just like find an alternative? So what is the advice for parents who, it's an overwhelming amount of professionals who don't know as it pertains to autism? So I don't know if that.
Okay, yes, it is on. I'm glad you asked your question because you came to the right place for those answers. For one, it's all about setting. If your child is in mainstream public school with autism, you're not going to get all the services you need. So you might need to look at a District 75 setting. And there is where he can be in an inclusion course where he's in a mainstream course, but he's getting special education lessons. So there's different settings for your child, and you always fight. That's your baby. If no one's gonna fight for him, if you're not gonna fight for him, nobody else is gonna fight for him. So you always fight, and don't ever think that you're by yourself, because you're not. It may feel that way, but you have advocates, you have educational advocates, you have parent advocates. Some people don't know how to articulate things. So to say that, mom, he has autism, he can't do it, is not the right thing to say. And he needs to have some equity and inclusion courses, because that is not the thing to say to a parent. There is so many resources for you. And if after this is over, we can talk and I can guide you in the right direction. Do you guys?
Yes, I also would like to connect with you and give you some ideas how to navigate. And I also want to mention for the public out there, the IEP is the golden goal, meaning that if you say on that IEP that your child is going to get, let's say, 2 times speech, 2 times a week, and 2 times OT, 2 times a week, and he's going to be on like, let's say in a classroom where he's going to have access to typical developing kids, that needs to happen, because that's what you guys as a team got together and say this is what is gonna work for him during the school year. If that's not happening, that's where you need to hold people accountable. The other thing I want to say is remember what I mentioned, you need your team of people for you. I mean, in anything you do in life, you need people like cheering for you. So you're gonna need that. Even if it is the Department of Education, you're gonna need let's say a psychologist on your side. You may need to find somebody on your own. Like I can give you a personal example. When I was having a circumstance with my own child, I contacted Kate, and that's how I got to know her. And she helped me. She came to my son's IEP meeting, and we were able to do what needed to be done. And now he's doing well. So it's a lot of work. I can tell you that. Unfortunately, it entails a lot of work. I don't like to use the word lazy, but since Tamara and Nick use it, I'm gonna use it too. People have gotten lazy, and unfortunately, we have to work harder. But that doesn't mean that because of that, okay, he's not gonna get the services that he or she needs. So let us connect. I'm happy to, give you my number and help you. But this is how we also help other parents, because I am sure whatever information I give you, you're gonna share it with somebody that is going through your same experience.
And from my experience with in fourth grade, in school in general, you either if the bus comes, if your kid doesn't want to go to school, you gotta get on that bus. All right, you want the microphone back?
Question from the audience?
Thank you. My name is Adams, and it's a pleasure being here today. I'm learning a lot as a parent. I want to commend, first of all, YAI and all of you for putting on this presentation, this conference. I have a young adult son. He's autistic, and last Friday he came home with a lot of anger. There was an unexpected routine at school, and I haven't seen this display. I haven't seen him display anger for the past 3 years or 4 years. This is the first time since that experience. And he came home and he pounded the table and he went to his room and he started, he had a meltdown. This question is for Nick and anybody else on the panel. Nick mentioned that he struggled with anger and he went to Westbrook School, and I would like to know what strategies you use to overcome that anger and how I can help my son manage, his anger. I don't see it often. And what strategies the teachers use? Maybe your parent can shine some light on this too. Sorry if I put you on the spot, but thank you so much.
So, that's a very good question. That's a very good question right there. So you got if your son's on the autism spectrum, you got to teach him coping skills. Like for me, like I told you guys, like I draw a lot and I play video games and I keep myself occupied a lot of time, like listening to music too.
No, I don't really have anything to say.
What about you, Tamara?
Is it on? Okay. I find, do you give him so what I do with my son, because my son has aggression sometimes too. When he comes in from school, I ask him how his day is, and I give him a safe space to vent. I think that we all need that, whether we're on the spectrum, neurodivergent, whatever it is that we have, we all need that safe space to vent. He also has a therapist too that can give him coping tools, mechanisms to use, because a lot of times we just need the tools to help us get through what we're feeling. And so giving him that safe space to feel however he feels, get it off his chest, after he does that, he feels better. And now he can go on with his day like that didn't happen. It happened, we felt what we felt, and now we move on. That is my,
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, I'm Nick's mom. Thank you guys for all of this. It's always so helpful to hear it. I'm on the other side of it and he's taken the reins now of what I did for a long time. So it's really cool to see him doing that. The coping strategies, especially, I mean, I just felt a lot of the testosterone and it would go like 0 to 60 so fast. So my background is fitness and I just got working out. Sometimes it was like laps, you know, jumping on a trampoline, just like redirect that anger in the moment because you can't get to the coping strategy if you're in it. Like if you're in it. So setting is huge and catching it. Like if you can catch it before, but then you know when it's there. It's running its course. So those were big things. And I had a yoga program and dragged Nick to everything when he was a kid. So that really helped to get upside down, like getting blood to the brain. It's amazing. Like, and it would happen in like 30 seconds to a minute, like just be able to get him to a point where then he could hear me or the teachers or what was going on and then get to the coping strategy. So, because we were trying the coping strategies and they weren't working because it just got out of control. So I don't know if that happens to anybody, but just because it was an extreme version, that was always really helpful. So try the physical fitness. It really works.
I know we're pressed for time a little bit. I just wanted to say quickly that for a lot of autistic folks and neurodivergent folks, if you can explore a little bit about burnout, inertia, meltdowns, and seclusion. The world is in a very overwhelming place. And even whenever it can seem on the outside that everything is fine, you're just experiencing a lot. We are constantly, it's good to have the routine, but when the routine shifts, that's a lot of new information. And I might be, a person on the spectrum might be experiencing and taking all that in. So the day itself from, wake up, alarm, on the bus, it's all there, even whenever they're not expressing it externally. So number one, start with the school. What happened? What changed that day? Is it going to happen again? If it's needed, of course, there's always behavior intervention, a functional behavioral assessment. You just want someone who's qualified to do it. So you're getting good information. Talking to your child, of course, it happens. To what extent can we change the setting, the environment, right? When can we just have compassion? Everyone gets upset. I get a sense that it was a little more than normal. So it seems like it's really, it's staying with you. You want to make sure your son's okay and that the teachers have that right answer, that better answer. I'd rather have someone say, I don't know, but I'll find out than, right? It's just, I don't know. Right. That's not satisfying. That's not okay. You have a right to a better answer than that. I'll also say that these parents and Nick have let you know that you have rights. And you can say, I know that I have rights and I may not know what they all are. Read your procedural safeguards, but I'll be back and I'll bring friends and I'll bring professionals. Right. But for the behavior question, it's, you got some great answers up here, but, there are a few things that you can do within the IEP through conversations, but also I think understanding that neurodivergent autistic perspective of the need for a time to decompress. And it might look a lot longer and it might look a lot different than it is for some, neurotypical folks. But yeah.
So we do have some questions that are coming in virtually. We have worked through our break. So if folks that are in person need to take a break, go for it. But if our panel is okay with it, I have a few questions that have come in virtually and we'll just keep plugging along. But just to update everyone that is tuning in virtually, we're running behind. So Guy Stevens will probably start about 11:15. We'll be 15 minutes late. But question from virtual, first one. How did you prepare for transition to adulthood? And what helped in the transition from pediatric to adult healthcare? So I don't know who wants to take that question, but it's how did you prepare for transition to adulthood? I don't know, Nick, if you wanna take that question first, like preparing from school, moving into adulthood. How'd you prepare?
Well, I moved out of my parents' house when I was 15 years old, and I have been living in residential ever since. So yeah.
Was there anything that the school did that helped you prepare for transition?
Well, to become an adult and to graduate from high school, they helped me with controlling my anger a lot. And I thank them for that, all from the bottom of my heart.
I understand by law, the IP team, needs to put in place certain, programs and services for adulthood. Like they will connect maybe to Access VR or maybe to OPWDD. That actually has to start like maybe early, like when the child or the young adult is like maybe 14, 15. By law, it's the law, they just cannot completely don't talk about it. They may try because, well, we already had this cost, but I mean, it's part of the law, a child with an IP, it's entitled to like adulthood planning. And that happens, through the many different years at the age of 14 until they age out. I gotta say, like, it's a process that I'm going through myself. It's not like it doesn't happen often, but as parents, we have to say, okay, what about this? We need to have that ahead of game plan because unfortunately, we already had discussed this through this panel. Sometimes they just don't talk about it. They just, even if you mention it, they dismiss you. They say, oh, I don't know. And then it hurts your child. So it is really important as a parent, you can start like contacting, I say, your child's school. They should have a guidance counselor and say, okay, look, my son is 17 now. What's the plan for when he becomes an adult? So unless you do that, it may not happen. I'm not saying that it never happens, but sometimes it does not happen. And Tamara can probably chip in more because she has a child around that age.
Yes, I agree with Susanna on that. With OPWDD, it's best when your child gets first diagnosed. My son's been with OPWDD, I think, since he was 5. So like that transition period, they automatically start to ask questions and, if you have a care worker, they'll start to ask you questions. And also if your child is in school, the counselors, when my son first started going through puberty, what I had set, his pediatrician, his guidance counselor, they started talking about, the difference between, men and women and how your body is going to change. Not that my son paid any of that any mind, but it was helpful for me. So transitioning from pediatrics into adult medicine, when you have a child with special needs, even if you don't have a child with special needs, you can see a pediatric doctor up until you're 21. And then after that, you go into adult medicine. If you have a child with special needs, most times you'll connect with a pediatrician that is familiar with autism and things of that nature. That's what my son has. He has a pediatrician who is familiar with autism because a lot of times developmentally our child is not there, but chronologically, physically, their body is, developing, it's still developing. So they are more gentle, more understanding, and more informative than the typical doctor. So you just have to you have to do some research. Montefiore is a good clinic with that. Jacoby is really good with pediatrics as well. So those are just 2 I know off the top of my head that I've worked with.
There's a project that Synergia, YAI, AHRC participated in with other organizations, and it's called Project Shine, and it's yoursexualhealthtoolkit.org. And so it's sexual and relationship health information for youth and young adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. It is at a level that we can all understand it. It is online. Please take a look at that. There were some great things here. Again, that you have rights to a transition plan. I know this question was online, so it's measurable post-secondary goals. It's easy to miss on the IEP. Please spend time. There are transition and college access centers in every single borough. You can set up a consultation appointment there. There's information online. I think the information that this panel gave is really excellent. There's not enough out there for transition. It's something that I would encourage you also to try to make the goals on your IEP as specific as possible and follow up regularly. As Susanna mentioned, it's your guidance counselor or your transition coordinator, the job developer. But there are resources out there. I agree, they're not as easy to find as they should be. And again, this is another area, as Nick reminded us, for self-advocacy and to ensure that there is information and that the student, as much as possible in the way that they communicate, is driving the process. And then what was the last? Hold people accountable.
I got a few more questions. So actually, the next one is not a question. Just wanted to thank you all for your time and encouragement this morning. So that was nice. So the next question is about resources for parents and caregivers when your child was first diagnosed. Can Susanna or Tamara, do you have one maybe resource or place that you recommend for when someone's first diagnosed?
I started to work with, at that time was called Resources for Children with Special Needs. Now it is called Include NYC. They happen to have like a program, which I actually know the person that runs the program, for, younger parents to help them like navigate and understand. And, they have a support group. Definitely, I would encourage that person to contact Include NYC. She can Google it. It's www.includenyc.org. So they have a particular session for your younger children, and they have different, workshops throughout the month many times. That's like one that I'm thinking, but there are more. But definitely starting with them is very, very helpful.
Yes, Include NYC is very popular. When I started was a very long time ago. You had to go through the Kennedy Center, and that's when they came to your house. Yeah, that's when they came to your house, and they did. So now you have OPWD has the front door. So I'm not quite sure how you get started with that process anymore, but I do know that you can go to your pediatrician and then they'll get you started with the evaluation. And then after that, you get that diagnosis. After you get that, you can go to OPWDD and you can go to look online, and they have front door sessions all the time. I believe it's monthly, and then you get started there.
That was really great. The front door has actually, all of those sessions are now online. So I think Rebecca also put it in the chat. So you can Google OPWDD front door and attend a session. You can learn about the services that OPWDD provides, Include NYC, Synergia, CEDA is a fabulous parent training information center. And you can Google they're actually nationally supported parent training and information centers, Advocates for Children, of course, AHRC, we have our education advocacy program, YAI. These are great places to go for information. Your local DD council in the boroughs, those are parents that are waiting for that phone call. I know we're pressed for time, but there are certainly places. These are some great ones. These are the big ones, and there are folks there also who will, if you need even more specific information, they will refer you to it.
I was just thinking maybe what we will do is we will put together all these resources that have been mentioned, and we'll make sure everybody that attended virtually and in person gets them, maybe like a resource sheet. I got a couple more questions. Thanks for hanging in there. So what questions should I ask to find out if a particular setting is working for my child? How do I know if a setting is the correct setting for him? And this particular parent wanted to just share that their child is nonverbal and have no idea what happens during the school day. So trying to figure out if the setting is appropriate, what questions to ask.
I am a fan of working with a team of people. I can do a lot by myself, but I also like to involve like the speech therapist, the psychologist, or maybe the teacher, the teacher in the school. We have every, like, I would say twice a year, sometimes depending on the school, 4 times a year, a meeting to discuss the child's progress and how's it going. As a parent, and this is where I always say parents have power, you can say, I really would like to know, who do I need to speak with? Because I would like to know how my son or daughter is doing in school. So maybe I agree to twice a month. It could be an email. It could be a phone call. It could be you coming to the school. These are ways to find out what's going on in school. You can even ask for a visit. You want to come and observe your child class. In terms of like knowing if it is the proper setting, this is also discussed at the IEP time. And if for whatever reason you feel, because we do have that right, like if you're feeling like for whatever reason, something is telling me that my son is not making the progress that he's expected to make, or he's coming home very angry, or he's not really like paying attention, you're not feeling like comfortable with whatever is happening, I would recommend reach out to your IEP team and let them know, I want to evaluate my son if that's the case, or I want to have a meeting to discuss his progress. We have to be like the person starting to start things going, because unfortunately, the school is not going to say, oh, Miss So-and-so, we don't think your son is making the progress. We have to take like the lead and ask, okay, how's my son doing? If you don't know, how's my son doing? And you can even show up. You can, I wouldn't recommend showing up because you don't want to waste your time, but if that's what you can do, do it. You need to communicate with your school and find out, email, go in person. Maybe you can write a note. You are entitled to know how your son or daughter is doing in school. And there's different ways, and we can definitely continue to have this conversation. Like, how can I know? I mean, your son is supposed to be making progress. That's why they have an IEP. And if, maybe your son needs more speech, they have like, I learned they have prompt therapy that helps kids like either like, start like developing words. They can learn sign language. We parents have to kind of like do things because, unfortunately, and I know it's sad because we have to work, we have to take care of the kids, but unfortunately, people are not doing their job. So we have to do it for them because it's our child.
I love Susanna. She's so professional and together. I'm not that kind of parent. Pop up, show up, just show up, and then you will find out what's going on. And I also wanted to say, join the SLT. Get on the board on the SLT. You'll see everything. The CEC. I'm on all those boards at the school, so the school know me very well. Every school that my son's been in, they know me very well. I'm there. I pop up. Now it's kind of hard with all the things that's going on in schools, so there's a lot of precautions, but still pop up, show up, and and you just ask, well, how's my child doing in school? And if it's not adding up to what, like Susanna said, that IEP is saying, well, then you have to get you a team of people to go in and figure out what's going on and how we can change the setting.
I got one more. Okay, so.
Could I just jump in
Yeah,
and
go
say
for it.
quickly, I know that everyone here said it, you were right on your IEP. So understand your measurable annual goals. And if there are questions also, maybe you need a new evaluation. There's a triennial evaluation, but also if the evaluation isn't telling you how your child learns, whether or not they communicate verbally or not, they are communicating. And so you need an assistive technology evaluation. Get the evaluation that you need. Maybe it's a neuropsychological evaluation. You can ask for referrals. You want to ensure that you have high quality information that can inform the goals on the IEP, and that your child is annually, that they're challenging enough that they take a year to accomplish in general. But if they're not meeting those goals, something's not right. It's their services, and often it's the setting. And again, the Department of Education is required to have a range of special education placements and services. So special education is a service, not a place, but sometimes it is the whole school approach to the setting. And by the way, you heard here, there are students in District 75, there are students who attend non-public schools, there are students who attended private special education schools if it didn't work out. So again, it is a journey, but there's a range of ways to know. Sometimes it starts with that assessment, but it often starts, I'll say, from every single person on this panel, with a feeling also. You knew that something wasn't right. So your child can tell you.
Okay, so the last question is,
Why does the Department of Education not provide ABA therapy for in-school services? So this is a parent just saying that its son was evaluated in EI, diagnosed with autism, and just doesn't understand how it is that they can diagnose ASD but not provide ABA. Anybody want to?
That's, yeah, you know what? I think that's a really complicated and interesting question. It's a great question. ABA is one of the, it's an evidence-based methodology, applied behavioral analysis. I also just wanted to say community education council. You said join your community education council, join your senior leadership team at your school for jargon. So I agree. And by the way, all of these folks are now leaders and advocates. So, okay. ABA, there is a program called AIMS in the DOE. It's a pilot program. It's available for K through 2. It doesn't go beyond that right now. Those are ABA classrooms. Some of the classrooms provide Horizon also was based on an ABA methodology. Again, it's not going to be there are different types of ABA as well. So discrete trials, right? A lot of times, a lot of children are receiving that in 4410 or in special education preschool classrooms. It is not the only methodology. It is not the only approach that works. So if you have an evaluation that says that your child requires ABA and a particular type of ABA to learn and make progress, then absolutely advocate for it. And there are certainly schools and programs that can provide that type of approach that should have a BCBA on staff. We'll have regular check-ins with your plan. So again, if you have an evaluation that says that your child needs ABA, you can advocate for it. And there are some placements in the DOE that provide it. But there are a range of classrooms. I will also say that folks who are autistic have also said that ABA was not always the approach that worked for them or even the right approach for them. And there are a lot of kids that I work with for whom ABA is not the right intervention. And they have made that clear, that it was just a type of training that did not remain appropriate for them. While it may have been perhaps in preschool or early intervention, it was not, as they got into middle school or even high school, the right intervention.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We are now going to take a 5-minute break, and we'll be back at 11:25. So you can take a bathroom break, whatever you need. And also for the virtual attendees, we are going to be back at 11:25. Thank you. All right, everybody, we are going to get started, and I'm going to give a quick introduction to Guy. So Guy joins us from Maryland and is the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint, AASR for short. AASR is a nonprofit that Guy started in 2019. AASR is a community of over 25,000 parents, self-advocates, teachers, school administrators, paraprofessionals, attorneys, and related service providers and others working together to influence change in supporting children whose behaviors are often misunderstood. Join me in welcoming Guy as he presents Misunderstood, Shifting from a Punitive Mindset. Welcome, Guy.
Thank you. And thank you for the introduction. I'm really excited to be here today. And, I almost wish I was there in person now, although my commute was probably much better than it would have been if I was trying to get there in person. So excited to be here. And let me tell you a little bit about who I am and what we're going to be talking about today. As was mentioned, my name is Guy Stevens. I am the founder and executive director of a group called the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. More importantly, like many of you, I am also a father of 2 amazing children who have been the inspiration for the work that I do in many ways. And of course, I have a big focus on education and systems and a big belief that we can do better not only for kids, but also for teachers and staff in our schools. So I'll share with you, that again, I'm really excited to be here. I'm from Maryland. So if you've been to Maryland before, kind of along the Chesapeake Bay, known for blue crabs and oysters, and of course the Baltimore Orioles, In addition to the work that I do with the Alliance, I serve as the Vice President of the Board of Directors for the ARC of Maryland. And of course, the ARC is a fantastic organization. I'm also on the Board of Directors for PDA North America, which is also another amazing organization that's doing some fantastic work. Like many of you, I am here today really because I have a personal story and a personal experience. I'm not going to go into my whole story or my family's whole story in a lot of detail, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of a sense here that several years ago I entered into a rather unexpected journey. I have a son who is autistic, who is neurodivergent. I have always been I would say, involved in his education, involved in the IEP process, involved in trying to help my son to be successful. And of course, as many of you have faced either as parents or self-advocates or professionals, you understand that that journey sometimes is one that can be challenging. And of course, while ready for the challenges, you're not always ready for everything that comes your way. That said, I have always been a proponent of doing whatever I can to learn so that I can effectively work to support my son and both of my children, frankly, which is probably the same reason why some of you are here today. I had the opportunity in my background to do some training. Somebody mentioned earlier, I think the parent training centers, which are fantastic organizations. I went through a program in my home state of Maryland that was led by our parent training center there, which was a really intensive program about IEPs and federal law and advocating for your children. Did another program through the Family Leadership Institute. Today, I actually get to guest lecture for programs conducted by the ARC of Maryland, the Partners for Policymaking program, which is a fantastic program as well. But my story into beginning to do this work and really taking my advocacy to a different level began because my son was physically restrained and secluded in a Maryland public school. And many of you may be familiar with the concepts of restraint and seclusion. Some of you may not. I'll tell you that the first time my son was restrained and secluded, they were never things that I would have imagined potentially happening or being done to a child in a school. I would have never imagined that there would be a situation where my son was having a difficult time and ended up getting forced into a room against his will and not let out. Nor would I have guessed that he might have ended up being physically restrained. But those things happened, and they resulted in a significant amount of trauma for my son. I'll tell you that there were a few occasions that these things happened. The very last time it happened to him was a little over 5.5 years ago, and it was the last time. And kind of after it happened to him, I made a promise to my son. And the promise was something relatively simple, but I guess in life, sometimes be careful what you say because you never know where it will lead you. My promise was that what was done to my son was restrained and secluded and traumatized. My son was restrained and secluded in a way that would not even have been really consistent with what our state law in Maryland said about the use of restraint or seclusion and when that might have been appropriate at the time. So it never should have happened to my son. And I made a promise to him that I would do whatever I could to make sure that it didn't happen to him again or it didn't happen to other kids like him. And that very simple promise led me to a journey of doing a lot of research to understand why kids were sometimes being restrained, secluded. If you dig deeper, it's a lot of the disproportionate discipline that we see as well. Suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment. We still have 19 states that allow you to hit a kid in the name of discipline. So I began to kind of try to drill in and understand why these things were happening, who they were happening to, and ultimately what we could do differently. And that led me initially to begin locally advocating for change within my school system, within my school district. That advocacy began to grow when I formed the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint just about 5 years ago. In fact, we just had a 5-year anniversary. So the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint started in 2019. The initial goal of the organization really was after this had happened to my son, after my son had really experienced a lot of trauma due to this, and I began doing that research, I realized that some of this information was kind of hard to come by. And one of my first goals in starting the Alliance was I wanted other people that might be going through this to be able to access information. I wanted them to not feel alone. as many of you know, a journey as a special education parent, a journey as a self-advocate, a journey as a professional that is working to make change. Sometimes it can be really isolating. And I wanted also people to understand that they can influence change. So I began the Alliance, and something kind of happened after that I didn't expect. When I started the Alliance, I had been working in the same job for over 20 years. A job that I would have told you 6 years ago that I would have thought I might have retired from. I had no intent of trying to find a new profession or new job or find something to fill my empty time. But when the Alliance started, it began to grow. And as it began to grow, more parents began to come, more self-advocates began to come, teachers, administrators, paraprofessionals, school psychologists, and others. Our group began to grow. And it began to grow in a really meaningful way. And that meaningful way was really kind of beginning to look at how could we influence change? How could we influence change in some of the practices that were happening in schools and other settings around the country? So we became very concerned about the use of aversive practices, restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment. We became very concerned about many of the things that are often done to kids in the name of behavior. And that's what led to our formation. So our mission is really about changing policies and law, trying to reduce and eliminate the use of punitive discipline, outdated behavioral management approaches, and ultimately have an impact on what's called the school to prison pipeline, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But unfortunately, a lot of our kids are having really poor outcomes. And one of the things that I was thinking about as we were getting ready to start today, when we look at some of these situations, our children are not broken. Our children, it's very often the systems that aren't working to appropriately support and serve our children and our families. And that means that we need to change systems that aren't working, better support individuals. And that takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of advocacy. But when people come together, I really believe that a lot can be possible. So, we have a vision as an organization about really creating, safer schools for students, teachers, and staff. I happen to be a huge proponent of this idea that the same thing that we can do to improve the outcomes for our children very often will improve the outcomes for our teachers and our staffs and create better environments as well. So that's a little bit about the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. We focus in three broad areas. We focus on legislative work, education, and family support. What that looks like on a legislative front, I've been involved since I started the organization in trying to influence changes in policies at a school district level, in laws at a state or federal level, and that has taken many different forms. I'll give you an example. I've testified to support bills in many states to reduce restraint seclusion, really eliminate seclusion, and move away from a lot of the aversive practices that are causing a lot of harm. I work with lawmakers across the country to try to support changes in policy that will ultimately better support our children. I've also had the opportunity in the past to testify to a congressional committee on a bill called the Keeping All Students Safe Act, which is a federal bill that has been around for a while. It is not passed as of yet, but I remain hopeful. But it's a federal bill that would put standards around the use of restraint seclusion in schools around the country. Currently, there is no federal law when it comes to restraint seclusion in schools. There are federal laws in law enforcement in medical settings. I believe it's actually a need because when you look at the data from things like restraint seclusion, you very quickly learn that it's disproportionately kids with disabilities becoming kind of a civil rights issue, a human rights issue, a disability rights issue. So we do a lot of work to support legislative change. And that's important and it's helpful. In my home state of Maryland, about 2 years ago, we were able to begin prohibiting the use of seclusion in our schools, our public schools, but we've worked across the country to help support laws like that as well. However, laws and policies are not enough. What we really need to do is educate people about what are the better things that we can and should do. How do we better support neurodivergent children? How do we better support autistic children? What can we do to really change systems that aren't working well for many of our children? And what we know is that even well-intended laws sometimes have negative or unintended consequences. So what we don't want to do is pass a better law to say, don't do these things anymore, and have other things being done that are equally harmful. We don't want to prohibit the use of seclusion only to find that it's led to an increase in more restrictive setting placements or an increase in referrals to law enforcement. So education is really key to this. Shifting people's perspectives, their hearts, their minds, and their practices is really critical. And to that end, I do things like this event that we're doing today. I speak at events around around North America. We do some training as well. We've actually been working with one of the largest crisis management training providers in the nation to develop new training for schools to help people move away from a lot of reactive approaches into really going upstream to better support kids. So we do a lot of work in that education space. And the final thing we do is a little bit of kind of individual support. What this looks like is that if a parent contacts us and says, hey, my child's being restrained or secluded, or my child is being excessively suspended, we try to support parents and offer them help in terms of helping to guide them in terms of what they can do. And of course, we always begin from a place of collaboration. How can we collaborate with your school or your school district? How can we work together to try and make a positive change? Of course, that doesn't always get us where we need to get. And sometimes it's a matter of making people aware of what their rights might be in terms of filing a state complaint under IDEA, or even filing a federal complaint through the Office of Civil Rights or the Department of Justice. So we try to make people aware of kind of what they might be able to do to influence change and support, to the best of our ability, people in doing that. And that includes educators as well. We will often get a call from an educator who realizes that the practices in their school are not serving children well. And they might say, hey, we're using a lot of restraint seclusion. We need to move away from that. What might we do? And in that case, we would work with educators as well to try to provide support for the work that they're doing. So that's a little bit about kind of who we are and what we do. What I want to talk about today, though, is really specific. I happen to have a strong belief that many children are being chronically misunderstood in the name of behavior. And when children are misunderstood in the name of behavior, it leads to a lot of things downstream. It leads to a lot of behavioral approaches that are often not working for our kids. It leads to a lot of punitive consequences. It leads to things like restraint and seclusion. So the cost of being misunderstood can be really great. So what I want to talk about today is I want to talk a bit about the problem. Who's misunderstood? Why are they misunderstood? Then I want to get into, and we're going to shift some pretty significant gears here, but I want to share with you a little bit of brain science this morning. And as we get in the afternoon, I know brain science sounds, like something really intense here, but we know a lot today that we didn't know 10 or 20 years ago. And what we are learning really can help us to see behavior differently. And when we see behavior differently, we can respond differently. And when we respond differently, we tend to have a ability to have different outcomes. So I'm going to share with you a little bit of brain science. We won't go too heavily into that, but I think that it might help you to begin thinking about things a little differently. It might help you to advocate for different approaches as well in working or supporting your child or yourself. And then finally, I want to talk about kind of changing perspectives. Knowing that there's a problem, being aware of some of the science around, behavior. What can we do to change our perspective? And once we change our perspective, how does that help us then to change the things that we do to better support individuals? So that's our agenda for the day. We've got quite a bit to cover here. I'm going to try to get through all of it, and of course, allow a little bit of time for questions as well. I do want to kind of just make a note here that, I always get excited about coming to an event like this, whether it's virtually or in person, although it's really nice to be there in person as well. But, as advocates, as caregivers, as self-advocates, as educators, as people that are working to support individuals with disabilities, the work that you are doing really can change the world. I happen to be a huge believer that individually, we can have a tremendous amount of impact. And, while systems are hard to change and sometimes the problems seem overwhelming, anytime we make a positive change, even for one child, we're making a difference. We're making a difference that is worth making. So I want to thank all of you that are here today, attending virtually, attending in person, for the work that you're doing, the commitment that you have, whether it be to your child, your peers, your people that you serve. you're doing things that are really important and can make positive change. So thank you. I also want to frame our discussion today. So I'm going to share with you some things that maybe, maybe you haven't heard some of these things before. Maybe you have different experiences. Maybe you have different ideas or opinions on some of these things. I want to frame this conversation in the fact that while I'm going to point out concerns and I'm going to point out things that I believe can change, this is not about being critical. It's not about saying, you're doing this wrong or you're doing this wrong. This is really about this idea that, and I think you can't say it any more beautifully than Maya Angelou says it, which is do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. It's my belief that in many areas today, we know better. And we have this opportunity to do better and really get to better outcomes. And some of the outcomes that we're seeing today are not only poor outcomes, they're outcomes that are affecting people's entire lives and their futures. So anytime we have the ability to do better, we should. And again, just in the spirit of this is about collaboration. This is about working together to ultimately do better and have better outcomes. So let me talk about the problem. The problem, of course, from my perspective, being that many children are being misunderstood in the name of behavior. So I want to begin by talking about, what I mean by this. And what I mean by this is that many of the approaches being used in schools and other settings are often not working well for kids that really need our help the most. Many of the things that we're doing, and we're doing routinely, are not working well. And we're seeing an increase in many situations, not a decrease in maybe it's stress-related behaviors in the classroom or other issues of concern that are beginning to kind of rise up. And much of what we do today, and I'm going to talk about this in a little more detail, but much of what we do today is based on 100-year-old ideas around behavior, ideas about things like operant conditioning or reward and consequence models that have really been prevalent for well over 100 years. And many of these approaches are actually not working for a lot of people that really need our help the most. So, we end up with many children that become misunderstood in the name of behavior. And we can drill down into that. And what we find is that there are certain children that are far more likely to be misunderstood than other children. So we can begin with children with disabilities, autistic children, neurodivergent children, children with ADHD. Children with disabilities are, for instance, the highest rates of restraint and seclusion. They are more often being restrained, secluded, more often being suspended and expelled. So if we look at the WHO here, it's children with disabilities. Black and brown children are far more likely to find themselves on the other side of a lot of punitive consequences. And of course, one of the other factors here is kids with a trauma background. And increasingly, there are more kids that have been exposed to traumatic experiences even in their very young lives. And we're going to talk a little later about how trauma affects the brain and how that trauma can actually lead to distress behaviors and how those behaviors are very often leading to kids that are being misunderstood. So at a very high level, kids with disabilities, Black and brown kids with a trauma history, far more likely to be misunderstood, far more likely to be subjected to a lot of punitive consequences in the name of behavior. We can drill down a little deeper and get into things like anyone that's ever heard of the ACEs study here. The ACEs study was a fairly famous study that happened a bit over 20 years ago by Kaiser, and it really looked at what they called adverse childhood experiences. The study, which was a long-term study, looked at kind of adverse childhood experiences, things that happened to kids when they were very young, and how that could result in later down the road a multitude of health issues and other concerns. So looking at things that happen to very young children, we tend to talk about like kids are resilient. Well, kids may be resilient, but at the same time, trauma can heavily affect anyone, including a child, and those effects can lead to kids that are more often misunderstood. But if we think about who else is likely to be misunderstood, kids who are adopted, kids in the foster care system, kids with generational trauma, kids in households with mental illness. There are a lot of kids that have risk factors for being more misunderstood. And of course, you can probably make a connection here that along with some of these bullet points, that there may be some additional trauma as well that goes along with these kids. So let's think about that. We know that there are certain kids that are more likely to be misunderstood. What's the outcome of that? What's the outcome of kids that are more likely to be misunderstood? The outcome very often is that misunderstood behavior leads to restraint, physical restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, and even corporal punishment. So kids that are more often misunderstood more often find themselves on the other side of a lot of punitive consequences. So if we think about this, I'm going to go through a couple of these areas here, but 80% of children that are physically restrained in school are children with disabilities. Very often, these are very young children, 5, 6, and 7 years old, who are being physically restrained. This is according to federal data. And I can tell you that federal data is probably not the best data in the world. However, when I look at statewide data where it's available, that number is often much higher. It's often 85, 95% of kids that are being physically restrained, and what we mean here is exactly what it sounds like, something you might more associate with a law enforcement intervention, being held in some way. There are standing restraints and seated restraints and all sorts of different kinds of physical holds. And of course, whenever you put hands on someone to physically restrain them, you're introducing a certain element of risk. When people are physically restrained, they will often go into a fight or flight response mode. They will flail their arms, they'll kick, they'll spit, they'll try to get free. Very often that puts the adults also in a fight or flight response mode. And it really creates an unsafe situation. I won't go through all the data here, but there have been many children that have actually died in schools around the country being physically restrained. So certainly something that we should be concerned about. Mechanical restraint. Recently in the news, there have been some headlines about kids that have been, taped to the floor or taped to desk. Mechanical restraint is when you use some kind of device to prevent somebody from moving freely. And what we find are sometimes neurodivergent kids, just for being neurodivergent, are being mechanically restrained or physically restrained. And if we look at the data there, about 41% of mechanical restraints are kids with disabilities. We also find that the use of seclusion or isolation, which happens across the country, and New York has made some progress in the last year on some of these issues, but seclusion is a practice of putting a kid in a room or area against their will and not letting them out. This photograph here shows a sample of what a seclusion room might look like. It's very often a small padded room. And what I'll share with you is that there is nothing calming or therapeutic about being put into a small room against your will and not let out. Kids often go into significant trauma responses in those rooms and carry with them a lot of trauma from having this done to them. But if we look at the kids that are more often secluded, 77% of seclusions, according to federal data, are children with disabilities. So again, the cost of being misunderstood, more likely to have these things happen. Suspension and expulsion, of course, 1 out of 10 children with disabilities is suspended. We see higher rates of expulsion as well. So our children are often at a much greater risk, and even corporal punishment. We have states still that allow this. 20% of the paddlings that happen are often kids with disabilities. And of course, you can trace that back down to children with trauma. Black and brown children far more likely to have these things done to them. So I think the important point here is to understand the impact. The impact of being misunderstood is being more likely to be subjected to a lot of punitive things. I want to share with you as well, I think kind of in the spirit of why we're here today. When we look at data, for instance, restraint seclusion data, and we look at it via disability, autistic children far more likely to find themselves being restrained or secluded. Kids that are labeled under kind of an emotional disability, far more likely, and I'm not a big fan of that label, but far more likely to find themselves being restrained and secluded. So it's important to realize that there are things that are being done to kids that are being misunderstood that really can lead them down the road to poor outcomes. And what we know is that some of these things not only lead to trauma, but can lead kids kind of down what we call the school to prison pipeline. And this idea of the school to prison pipeline is that kids that are most often subjected to punitive approaches are more likely to find themselves moving along the line to juvenile justice and criminal justice systems. But we can do better. We can do better, and we can stop some of this from happening. But often one of the results of being misunderstood is that you are at an increased likelihood of finding your child moving down that school to prison pipeline. And it happens in a very predictable way. A child that is being subjected to constant discipline and punitive consequences in school, a child that is being restrained, secluded, suspended, expelled, subjected to corporal punishment, a child that does not feel safe at school, that does not feel welcome at school, will become disengaged. It's not a place that I feel safe. It's not a place that I feel welcome. Kids become disengaged. Kids don't want to go. School refusal can be a real thing for a lot of different reasons, but it's often a sign that we should be concerned. Kids that are refusing to go to school, it's not just that they don't want to go and they don't want to participate and they don't want to learn. Sometimes there are things happening to them in those places that have led them to be fearful. And that refusal sometimes comes out of a stress response. So kids that are over-disciplined, more likely to become disengaged. And when kids become disengaged, they're far more likely to end up in the juvenile justice system. And children that end up in the juvenile justice system are far more likely to find themselves incarcerated. And again, same children with disabilities, Black and brown children, kids with a trauma history, we can trace this all the way down. So I want to talk a little bit about why kids are sometimes misunderstood. And I'm going to talk about a couple of different ideas here. I'm going to talk about some of the common approaches that we have in schools and systems around behavior. I'm going to talk a bit about behaviorism. I'm going to talk about our heavy focus on compliance. And I'm going to share with you some ideas about this, but how these compliance-based approaches often are failing kids that need help. And I also want to talk a little bit about how we think about or model disability. I'm going to share with you a little information today about two different models of disability and how the way we think about disability, the way we approach it, can affect how we respond and how we support people, and why I think that's important. So as I do that, I just want to share with you quickly these stats. As we mentioned, the school to prison pipeline, I think it was 68% of individuals that are incarcerated in state and federal prisons associated with having some sort of disability. This should be really concerning. And you can break it down and you can look at different disabilities, cognitive disabilities. We can look at attention, ADHD. We can look at learning disabilities. This is problematic. This is a sign that there's a system change that needs to happen. This isn't a matter of our kids are broken. We've got systems that aren't working and we need to make change. So let's dive into a couple of these areas I want to talk about. And again, kind of in the vein of what we discussed earlier, I'll share with you some ideas, and you may have different ideas and experiences, and I absolutely respect those. But I want to share with you what we're beginning to learn from a lot of the brain science that's out there and a lot of the research that's been done over the past couple of decades. I talked a little bit about this idea of behaviorism. Now, behaviorism is this theory that states that all behaviors are kind of learned through interactions with the environment, a process called conditioning. And the science of this really is from the late 1800s and early 20th centuries. A lot of research based on work with dogs and rats and pigeons. People like B.F. Skinner, who were doing a lot of work around behavior. And this led to a lot of ideas around behavior that became very focused on reinforcement or rewards and consequences. So a lot of the premise of behaviorism is really how do we change somebody's behavior? We change it by offering them either incentives or some kind of consequence. And many of these programs are really well intentioned. And what I'll say to you though is that many of these programs are failing kids that really need help the most, because very often the behavior that you're seeing is not coming from a place of intent. And that's what we're going to learn about brain science. We're going to learn that not all behavior is intentional. And that may sound like something very simple to say, but the impact of that really changes how you respond to kids and what you do. It changes kind of the focus that you might have as well on trying to help kids be successful. So, again, these approaches around behaviorism, they're very common in schools, things like sticker charts or clip charts or point and level systems, rewards and consequences. Even some of the programs that more systemically are in some of our schools are based on some of these behavioristic principles and rely heavily on extrinsic motivators. And I'll tell you in a minute why that can be problematic. So we'll kind of get to that. I also want to say that, very often in many of our systems, we are quite focused on compliance. Now, I love this cartoon, and I'll just describe it if you can't see it well. There is an adult standing kind of with their back to a pool, and there's a child in the pool with their hands up, obviously drowning. And on the clipboard, the adult's writing, "Student would not comply with instructions to swim." Now, I mean, this is a very simple illustration, but it shows a really important point. Very often, we are so focused on compliance that we're not focused on things that are really important, like teaching kids skills and ability, helping them to solve problems that might be giving them, providing a hard time for them to meet the expectations that are placed on them. And when we're only focused on compliance, we often are leading to situations where kids become escalated because we become so focused on compliance. So a lot of these strategies are not working. A lot of these strategies are common, but they're not evidence-based. And some of these strategies have actually been studied and really found not to be effective, but they are often very common in many of our behavioral programs. So this idea of compliance. Now, Alfie Cohen, I happen to be a big fan of his. He did a lot of work, wrote a fantastic book, and I'm going to mention some of this as well, but he wrote a fantastic book a number of years ago called Punished by Rewards. And instantly you might think, well, punished by rewards. Rewards are a good thing. How could somebody be punished by rewards? I'll talk more about that a little later. But Alfie has a quote here that says, "The way kids learn to make good decisions is by making decisions, not by following directions." And that's true of all of our children. When we empower and support people in making decisions, we're ultimately helping them to learn how to make better decisions and how to make decisions on their own. So why are we so focused on compliance? And we see compliance as a heavy focus in a lot of areas. How do we get there? Well, oftentimes we got there because that's how we were raised. We might have been raised in a very compliance-based household where, there were these expectations that we were expected to be compliant with. This might just be kind of what we are used to. It's been a very prevalent form of how children have been raised for many years. However, now we're beginning to know better. And when we know better, of course, we can do better. We got here kind of through often a lot of experience. So we talked a little bit about behaviorism, a little bit about compliance. And again, these are things that may put children at risk for being misunderstood because very often these approaches are not working. And I want to also briefly talk about a couple of different models of disability. Some of you may be familiar with these. I'm not going to go into a tremendous depth here, but I want to introduce two different ideas. One is what's called the medical model of disability. Now, the medical model of disability, we're all probably familiar with. It uses terms like disability, disease, dysfunction, disorder. It really tries to categorize things as symptoms or differences based on kind of an average, individual. It looks through a lens of kind of what's wrong. It's a deficit-based model. What's wrong with the person? And it often can lead to creating low expectations. I heard in the session before I started here, somebody sharing a story, and they were talking about, well, your child's autistic, what do you expect? Often when we look through the lens of a medical model, we find ourselves having very low expectations. Now, there's an alternative to that, and it's an alternative called the social model of disability. This was a model really developed by individuals with disabilities, and it's a different way of viewing disability, but it's also a different way of viewing the world. The social model of disability says that people are disabled not because of deficits, but because of barriers in society. They are not impairments of their difference, but rather there are things that are not accessible to them. Society is not accessible to them. So, barriers can be physical, like buildings having accessible toilets or ramps or whatever it may be, but it can also be a matter of people's attitudes and ideas. So under the social model, we really kind of look at not what's wrong with the individual. We look at the idea of like, what is making it difficult for this person to do the thing that they need to do? How do we remove barriers for people? And really that should be part of our focus, is about removing barriers, creating equality, and offering disabled people more independence, more choice, more control over their own lives and determination. So again, these are all things that can kind of affect kids being misunderstood. And I want to share just real briefly here, kind of going back to that idea of the approaches that we're doing that aren't working. When a child has a difficult time behaviorally, we very often are approaching it through a lens of reward, consequence. We approach it through a lens of motivation. What we're not doing is really trying to understand what's getting in the kid's way. And that's one of the important things that we need to kind of discover is why is something difficult and how do we make it more accessible for someone? So with that in the background, kind of my take-home message here in this first section is that we have a lot of kids that are being chronically misunderstood. You know, often again, kids with disabilities, Black and brown kids, kids with a trauma history. And if you begin to kind of, you know, add those things together, you know, I'm sure that many of you can go, yeah, yep, child with a disability, black or brown child, you know, child that has some trauma. As you begin to kind of put those things together, you know, we have kids that are even greater risk of a lot of punitive things being done to them. They are at a greater risk of being restrained, secluded, suspended, expelled, subjected to corporal punishment. They're at a greater risk of moving down that school to prison pipeline. But we can change this. We can do better. We can move away from approaches that are not only not working for our kids, we can better support all individuals in ways that will make a positive difference. So we're going to go sideways here a little bit into brain science. And I realize it's early in the afternoon. It's probably lunchtime. So if you're watching virtually, you can probably eat while you listen to this. So, you know, I realize that, you know, this may sound like a heavy subject. I don't think it's going to be too bad, but I want to introduce you just through some different ideas and different ways about thinking around behavior. So, you know, brain science does seem like something that could be complicated. We're going to go in a very shallow level into just kind of looking at some of the science that might help us to see things and see children differently. And of course, when we see children differently, we see different children and we can respond differently in a way that is going to be more supportive. So many of you have heard the phrase before, and many of you may have even said this before, things like behavior is communication. I will shake my head and nod and go, yeah, I agree with that. Behavior can be communication. It's often communicating a need or a challenge or a difficulty. But even more fundamentally than that, behavior is biology. And, you know, Dr. Stuart Shanker, who does some fantastic work, wrote a great book called Self-Reg. He has a quote here, the underlying cause for behavior is biology. We are wired to survive. We're going to talk a little bit about brain development today, and we're going to talk a little bit about that idea of being wired to survive and what that means in terms of some of the behaviors that kids exhibit. And why trying to address these behaviors with rewards and consequences often doesn't work for kids that really need help the most. Now, one of the biggest shifts that I hope that if you haven't already made, that you might make in this conversation and this discussion, getting into some of the brain science, is this idea. And to me, this is an extremely powerful idea. And it's a very simple idea. The idea is that not all behavior is intentional. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because very often in the things that we do around behaviors that might become a challenge in the classroom or a challenge at home is we think about them through the lens of intent. And when you think about a behavior through the lens of intent, you kind of begin to think that, well, gee, it's a matter of intent. It's a matter of motivation. What can we do to change the motivation? Truth is, very often it's not a matter of intent. In fact, we can kind of break behaviors down into two categories. The woman pictured here is Dr. Mona Delahooke, who wrote a fantastic book called Beyond Behavior. And if you're taking notes, write down Beyond Behavior, Dr. Mona Delahooke. It's a book that I would highly recommend for you. But she talks a lot in her book about this idea of top-down and bottom-up behaviors. The idea of top-down is that top-down behaviors, and we're going to talk about the brain biology here in a moment, but top-down behaviors are kind of thoughtful, intentional behaviors. We're going to dive into a very simple level of brain anatomy here and talk about your prefrontal cortex, which actually is responsible for a lot of your kind of intentful planning behavior. But top-down behaviors are behaviors that are thoughtful, intentional, and planned. Then there are bottom-up behaviors. Bottom-up behaviors are really what we would term as a stress response. They are often coming from our body, from our nervous system, from our brain wiring that actually helps to keep us safe. So back to Dr. Shanker's comment about being hardwired for survival, there are a lot of behaviors that we see that happen because children's prefrontal cortex, the thinking, rational, logical part of their brain, is not fully developed. And a lot of behaviors are coming kind of from a bottom-up perspective, coming from our what we call our limbic system, which I'll talk about in a moment here. So again, big idea, not all behavior is intentional. There are different kinds of behavior. So I'm going to dive into some very high-level brain science and talk about a couple parts of the brain. The prefrontal cortex, kind of the front part of our brain here, that plays a very important role in cognitive functions, in things like attention, impulse inhibition, cognitive flexibility. It's kind of our decision-making, planning, thoughtful part of our brain, that prefrontal cortex. It is responsible for a lot of our even helping to moderate kind of our social behavior as well. That prefrontal cortex is really critical for a lot of what we might think about as being kind of adult behavior, right? A well-formed prefrontal cortex is really critical. Now, moving through the brain, we have a structure called the hippocampus, and this is a structure that has a significant role in memory and learning. It's also part of our limbic system that helps to manage our feelings and our reactions. And then if we go a little deeper into that limbic system, we've got something called the amygdala. The amygdala is really about our fear response or threat detection. So our amygdala is our threat detection device. Now, of course, we have evolved from humans that had far different experiences than we have today. We have evolved from humans that were probably at some point surviving from the threat of predators and a very unsafe and dangerous world. We live in a different world today, not to say that it's all safe, but we live in a different world today. But our biology has remained fairly constant. This threat detection system is really there to help us respond in the event of something that is dangerous. So those three parts of the brain, and we're going to go no deeper than that, are really critical as we begin to look at behavior and we begin to try to understand where behavior really comes from. Now, one of the things that I want you to really understand here is that brain development happens in a very specific way. It happens kind of from bottom to top and from inside out. Now, if you look at that pattern, bottom to top, inside out, what does that mean for our brain development? It means the last part of our brain to fully develop is the prefrontal cortex. The thinking, rational, logical part of our brain is the last part to fully develop. And in fact, a lot of the research today says that part of our brain doesn't really fully develop till we're 25, 30, or perhaps even older than that. This is a very individualized process. What's important about that? Well, from a personal standpoint, as I learned that, I thought, well, gee, that probably explains why I made a lot of pretty bad decisions when I was a teenager. Probably explains why a lot of us do. And in fact, our brains are more wired to take risk when we're younger and have a less developed prefrontal cortex. So when you know that prefrontal cortex is the last thing to fully develop, you begin to understand that children are not miniature adults with fully functional brains, and we shouldn't have the expectation that they're going to respond to things in the same way that an adult would that has a fully developed prefrontal cortex, a fully developed thinking, rational part of our brain. So very often we put expectations on kids that really aren't even appropriate given their level of development. There's also a process called myelination. I'm not going to go over that in great depth, but even the transmission speed of signals in our brains increase over the first 30 years of life as our brains more fully develop. So brain development, really important. Now, the other part about the brain here, and I'm showing you a model here, and this model is actually something developed by Dr. Bruce Perry, who is a expert on trauma and has written many fantastic books. And if you've experienced trauma, I would certainly recommend his books. One of his books is called What Happened to You? And if you just think about the title of that book for a second, what happened to you is a different way of thinking about things. Often we say to people, what's wrong with you? As Dr. Perry talks about, we are kind of products of our experience and our trauma and the things that have happened to us. So it's a different way of understanding and looking at trauma. But Dr. Perry developed a model of the brain called the neurosequential model, neuro being brain, sequential being order. And he talks about this idea that our brain has kind of evolved in a way that certain parts of the brain are responsible for different things. Our brainstem does a lot of our autonomic stuff, our blood pressure, our heart rate. As we get into kind of our limbic system, it's our emotions, our sexual behavior, our appetite. And we get into our cortex, it's, our cognitive thought, our abstract thought. And what Perry goes on to say is that the way that the brain works is this kind of neurosequential way, meaning that in order to be able to reason, in order to be able to provide empathy or cognitive thought, you must first be regulated. That regulation, that emotional regulation is at the heart of being able to access the thinking, logical, rational part of your brain. so that when a child is dysregulated or an adult is dysregulated, and I'm sure that many of you can relate to this, who's ever been upset and in the, you know, kind of the moment of being upset, said something that you later really, really regretted and thought, well, why on earth did I say that? You know, when we are dysregulated, our ability to reason really changes quite a bit. So very often when kids are having a hard time and they're dysregulated and we're trying to, you know, reason with them, we're missing the thing that they need to really be supported. So he goes on to talk about this idea of relation or relating, and that, you know, human connection is probably one of the biggest ways that we're able to connect. And that human connection can help us to not only regulate, but ultimately through that human connection, we're able to reason. Many of you have probably had experiences similar to mine, which is I used to say that my kid was a relationship kid. He really needed somebody that got him and really put the effort into building a relationship with him, because through that relational safety, he was able to really kind of get to his ability that he could meet. So this idea of models can be helpful in helping us to understand how the brain works and how the brain responds. One of the things that we know is that when we become highly stressed, when we become dysregulated, our prefrontal cortex, the thinking, rational, and logical part of our brain, begins to go offline. So when you see a child that is having a difficult time, that might be having a meltdown, that might be in a situation where they're really under a tremendous amount of stress or very dysregulated, what we know about that individual, whether it's a child or an adult, is that their prefrontal cortex is kind of going offline. Dr. Excuse me, I lost the name for a second. We often talk about this idea of kind of flipping your lid. And Tina Payne Bryson and Dr. Dan Siegel had developed a model of the brain that they called the hand model. And they kind of have this idea that you've got kind of the brain stem and your limbic system and then your cortex. And then when we become dysregulated, we kind of flip our lid or our cortex goes offline. This is really important to understand in terms of the context of behavior. When a child or anyone is having a hard time, their thinking, rational, logical part of their brain is not being actively engaged. So when you begin to think about brain development, when you begin to think about this idea of different parts of the brain doing different things and what happens to us during dysregulation, you can begin to see children's behavior a little bit differently. Now, there's a scientist named Dr. Stephen Porges. He came up with an idea called the polyvagal theory. And again, this is a theory, but the idea of the polyvagal theory was to look at the mammalian nervous system. So the nervous system of mammals, us included, right? And this idea really kind of looks at the nervous system and how ultimately our nervous systems are wired for our survival, that our nervous systems are there to keep us safe. So, you know, what we call our autonomic nervous system, it plays a tremendous role in helping us to keep safe. And our autonomic nervous system is a nervous system that has two branches, what's called the sympathetic branch and something called the parasympathetic branch. Now, again, you don't need to remember any of this per se, but the idea of these two branches, well, we have this sympathetic branch, and what that does is that when we don't feel safe, it mobilizes us for threat. It mobilizes us to prepare for a fight or flight situation. So, you know, and this can happen in many different situations, even just somebody cutting you off in traffic and having kind of a almost accident, you feel your heart rate increase and your blood pressure increases. It can be a response to something that is perceived as a threat by a child, something that might not seem to be a threat. And people that have stress responses or trauma might find themselves triggered in situations that otherwise wouldn't be triggering to other individuals. But that sympathetic nervous system is what kind of gets us ready for a fight or flight response. And when that happens, when we become dysregulated, that cortex is really kind of going offline. The parasympathetic branch is believed to have a couple of different roles. One of those actually can be involved in helping us to regain calm. So if we become dysregulated, the parasympathetic nervous system can actually help us. And you probably have seen people that have put pieces of this into effect, like deep breathing. Deep breathing can have an effect on the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system. It can affect what they call the vagus nerve. It can actually help us to regain calm. There are focused attention practices that can help with that as well. So understanding a little bit of our nervous system can help us to understand, you know, kind of why we might respond in a certain way in certain situations. But the idea here is, again, that we are wired for survival. Now, Dr. Porges went on to talk about this idea of something he called neuroception. Neuroception is this idea that our brain and body, our nervous system, is constantly scanning the environment for cues of threat and cues of safety. And what happens is, with the information our nervous system brings in, we might begin to feel unsafe. And if we begin to feel unsafe, we might begin to move towards a fight or flight type of response. So, what does that look like? Well, someone who elopes might not feel safe, and that may be a response to something in the environment. It could be a sound, it could be a smell, it could be something somebody says, it could be a raised voice. But we have this internal threat detection system, and that internal threat detection system, when it becomes sensitized to a potential threat, will respond. And the body's response might be, like I said, it might be kind of a flight response, might be to leave, it might be to push all the books off your desk because you're having this internal fight response. And of course, one of the things that we know is that individuals that have experienced trauma, neurodivergent individuals, well, they may actually have a oversensitive threat detection system. Individuals with certain backgrounds and experiences, and he calls it faulty neuroception. I don't really love that term, but the idea is that some people's sense of safety may detect threat when in fact objectively everything's safe, right? There's no real threat in the room. So this is why we see that people that have experienced a lot of trauma, they may chronically kind of feel unsafe inside of their body. And these things are not always logical and rational. We're not talking about the cortex. So Dr. Bruce Perry mentions in a book an example and somebody in a class, and they become dysregulated. And what the trigger for that was that somebody actually came in the room that was wearing a cologne that was similar to a cologne that someone had worn that had abused them. They did not cognitively think about that and go, oh gosh, I smell this, now I don't feel safe. It is the body's response. So our body responds to these things in ways that keep us safe. Dr. Porges goes on to talk about, if you want to make the world a better place, you begin by making people feel safer. And it's through relationships, it's through connection, it's through supportive adults that we really can support that. And again, through those relations, we're able to reach the area of our brain that we're really able to reason. So really critical ideas here. I want to talk a little bit about trauma in the brain. We talked about different parts of the brain, and one of the things that you need to understand is that trauma can affect different parts of the brain. It can cause certain areas of the brain to kind of increase in volume or decrease in volume and activity. And what happens is the hippocampus, the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, all can be affected by trauma. And that trauma can change the brain. And I don't mean that figuratively, I mean literally cause changes in the brain. Those changes that occur can lead someone to really a situation where they are somewhat hypervigilant, somewhat always on alert. So if any of you out there have experienced trauma, you probably can relate to the fact that you often are kind of waiting for the next bad thing to happen, or feeling unsafe or unsecure in your bodies in times that might otherwise not seem unsafe to others. So trauma has a real impact. And one of the things that we know is that there is a tremendous intersection between trauma and disability. Children with disabilities often experience trauma. Just the act of being neurodivergent in a neurotypical world can be traumatizing for you. When you're in a world not designed for you, the world itself can provide trauma. Imagine, if you're autistic and non-speaking or have communication differences, not being able to be understood, not having people able to support you can be quite traumatic. So it's important to put in this context that trauma, of course, can change the brain. Those changes in the brain can lead to things like hypervigilance. And what we often find is that the kids that are being misunderstood in the name of behavior, they are kids that have often experienced trauma. That trauma changes the brain. Those changes in the brain lead kids to be hypervigilant. And hypervigilant kids are more likely to have distress-related behaviors. And often, in many settings, that distress behavior is met with compliance demands. So rather than supporting or connecting, it's making someone comply with the thing you want them to do. Very often that escalates situations. So rather than de-escalating a child who's having a hard time, we often find that a well-intentioned, but perhaps not appropriately trained staff member might actually escalate a situation rather than de-escalate it. And at that point, we are more likely to see a fight, flight, or freeze response from a child. And if a child, runs out of the room or knocks everything off their desk or throws something, they are more likely to then be on the other side of some kind of punitive consequence. Those punitive consequences, of course, can lead to additional trauma. So we create a cycle where the more we're using these punitive consequences on kids, kids that may have trauma, children with disabilities, the more these things tend to happen again and again, and the more we are priming kids for these experiences. So our take-home message here from a little walk through brain science, and again, we could spend an entire afternoon talking about some of this, is that a little bit of brain science can really help us understand why some kids are misunderstood. They're often misunderstood because we're not really thinking developmentally about brain development or our expectations around, what happens when a child is dysregulated. We're often not aware that when children have trauma, that they're more likely to be hypervigilant and more likely to engage in stress behaviors. And we're often unaware that the responses that we provide to behavior are actually leading to or resulting in more trauma. So we've talked about, the fact that some kids are being misunderstood. We've talked about what the problem is. We've talked about some brain science. And now I want to spend the last of our time talking about seeing kids differently, because I happen to be a huge believer that a change of perspective really can change the way that we respond in the things that we're doing. So, what I'm suggesting here is really shifting our lens on behavior and how we support individuals that are having a difficult time. You probably heard this idea before, like this is not a kid giving you a hard time. This is a kid that is having a hard time. The behavior that you see is often the very tip of the iceberg. What we really need to do is understand what's below that iceberg. Are there sensory differences? Are there challenges that a child is having that might be leading them to feel unsafe? What is leading to the behavior? And then how can we reframe that based on what we know about brain science? If we begin to understand something as a stress response versus thinking about it being an intentional behavior, we can then begin to get curious and try to understand, how do we better support that child? What's getting in their way? What has led to this being stressful? So a change in perspective is really, really critical. I'll share with you a couple of simple ideas here, but ideas that I think change the way that we respond. Colleague Dr. Stuart Shanker, he has a pretty famous quote that says, "When you see a child differently, you see a different child." Absolutely, that is true. When we look at people differently, when we look at them through the lens of connection, when we look at them and understand that they are having a difficult time, it can let us change our response. And by changing our response to be supportive rather than punitive, we're often able to move them in a better direction. Dr. Ross Green, many people are familiar with his work, wrote the book, The Explosive Child, Lost in School. He has a very simple thing that he says that has a tremendous amount of meaning, which is kids do well if they can. Now, that sounds like a simple thing to say, but very often in the world, we look at kids through a lens of kids do well if they want to. We think it's a matter of motivation. And if you think it's a matter of motivation, your response is typically rewards or consequences. And quite frankly, those things are often not working, because very often we have a kid that is not choosing to not do well. They're having a difficult time. They're unable to meet the expectation. They're dysregulated. But when we change our approach, we can change what's possible. If you think about this from a very simple example standpoint, if a kid had a difficult time reading, we would order a reading intervention. What we wouldn't do is say, okay, here's a book, read the book, and I'm going to give you a cookie, because the cookie is not going to help teach them how to read. But with behavior, we very often think about it through the lens of motivation, and we want to offer some incentive or some consequence to the behavior versus focusing on, oh, why are they having a difficult time? How can we help them to meet the expectation? So changing our philosophy is important. Understanding that human behavior is complex. It's not just a matter of changing behavior with gold stars and cookies. Our behavior is really a result of our brain biology, our genetics, our trauma, and of course, a lot of environmental factors. So it's something that takes an approach to solving that really is about being curious and problem solving. And of course, behavior is typically the symptom. It's not really what's underneath the surface. We really want to help children to do well. We've got to get beyond the fever and understand the issue. And very often the approaches taken with a lot of our kids, sticker charts and things like that, are not really getting at the cause of what is causing that child to have a difficult time. And I talked a little bit about, both rewards and consequences. And often people go, well, rewards are a good thing, right? Everybody likes rewards. Truth of the matter is that both rewards and consequences are ways of essentially trying to motivate behavior extrinsically. And there's actually a tremendous body of research here that dives into rewards and finds that rewards can actually have a negative impact, not only on children, but on their mental health. And what we find is that when you're using extrinsic things, things outside of the person to motivate them, it tends to decrease their internal motivation or their intrinsic motivation. Rewards often lead to an increase in anxiety or shame. When kids don't earn the reward they thought they were going to earn, in fact, when I talk to parents, and especially when I'm in a room with parents, and I ask a question like, has anybody ever had an issue where their child had a really big meltdown because they thought they were going to get a reward and they didn't? Some of the biggest meltdowns I've seen have happened because children had expectations about a reward that they didn't get. Now, the reason that child was having a hard time, the reward wasn't what they needed. Kids do well if they can. Kids do well if they have the support and the help meeting the things that they're trying to meet. So rewards can actually lead to a lot of different things, masking, kind of a devaluation of what that actual task is, a decrease in self-esteem. So great book, Punished by Rewards by Alfie Cohen, and I would certainly recommend you dive into it. But again, the problem here is not a matter of motivation. Very often kids need support. They need help learning skills. They need us to connect with them and relate to them and help them. So Alfie Cohen has a quote here: rewards and punishment are both ways of manipulating behavior. They are two forms of doing things to students. And to that extent, all the research says it's counterproductive to say to students, do this, or here's what I'm going to do to you. Punishment also applies to saying, do this and you'll get that. There's a tremendous body of research around this. Really what we need to do is focus in different directions. The other thing I want to mention to you, just kind of again, in thinking about how we move forward, changing our perspective, changing the language we use is really important as well. Ultimately what we want to do is reframe the way we're looking at behavior. And if we can reframe that through a science of brain science and neuroscience, we can reframe that in thinking through a social model versus a medical model. We can reframe that in the words that we use. Anyone here had the experience of having a child described this way, or being yourself described this way? Violent, attention-seeking, willful, naughty, intentional, non-compliant, dangerous. Kids are often described with language that assumes intent. And again, one of the things I'm trying to convey to you is that much of our behavior is really a survival response. It's a stress response. Much of our behavior is our nervous system working to keep us safe. And oftentimes these words can do a tremendous amount of harm and damage when we're using them to describe kids, when that becomes a lens that we're looking through. There's certain words that really always keep me a little bit concerned. When I hear kids described as violent, violent actually has a meaning, and it's usually about intending to do harm. It's using force to intend to hurt, damage, or kill someone. When we see a dysregulated autistic 5-year-old, are they really violent, or are they in fact having a difficult time? Do they need a different type of support? Are we seeing a stress behavior? If we look at the word behave, the word behave, to act in a particular way, do things in a particular way, manage oneself in a particular way. Think about the brain science here. What's the problem with all of these definitions? Very often they all assume intent. Now, I'm not trying to tell you that there is no intentional behavior, but much of the behavior you see from a young child, much of the behavior that you see in a neurodivergent young child, much of this behavior is often a stress response. It is a response from being in a situation that's not providing them appropriate support. When I see a kid being restrained and secluded, I see a kid often that is not being appropriately supported. So how do we reframe this? If we look through the lens of neuroscience and understand that not all behavior is intentional, reframe behavior is not just a matter of choice. Much of the behavior that you see is really a stress response or distress behavior. And even the word discipline, discipline, people often think about discipline as meaning consequences. Kids need more consequences. The kids that are being pushed down the school to prison pipeline have often had nothing but consequences, and those consequences are leading to more trauma and leading to more difficulty. If we trace back the origins of the word discipline, they actually meant to teach. In fact, it comes from a word meaning teaching. Discipline should really be about teaching, helping children to understand their nervous system, be helpful, helping them to understand and build skills to regulate, helping kids to be supported. Reframed discipline really is about teaching. And I don't mean we want to teach you a lesson. I mean, literally, when we're working to support people and we are providing discipline to help them learn things to better meet the challenges, we're making positive progress. Here at the Alliance, when people say, well, what do we do instead? And again, this could be an entire different, conversation and presentation. I often use a rather long phrase to describe it. And I say, well, the answer here is about using trauma-informed, neuroscience-aligned, relationship-driven, collaborative, and neurodiversity affirming approaches. Trauma-informed, understanding the impact trauma has on the brain, understanding how to respond and assume that a child may have trauma and how that response can change the way you support a child. Looking through the lens of brain science, a little bit of brain science goes a long way. And when you even begin to make that shift into saying, hey, maybe this is a stress response, maybe this is an unintentional response that we're seeing, what's getting in this child's way? What in the environment might be causing a child to have a hard time? Making that shift in neuroscience can be really helpful. I'm a huge proponent of relationships. Relationships are what provide safety. Relationships are what provide connection, and relationships help us to ultimately access that prefrontal cortex, the thinking, rational, logical part of our brain. I happen to, again, be a big believer that the 3 R's in education should probably be relationship, relationship, relationship. Really goes a long way. And of course, collaboration. Huge proponent of collaborating with kids. Rather than doing things to people or doing things for people, we're going to have far better results when we do things with people. So those are incredibly important principles to consider here. Dr. Mona Delahooke, who I mentioned previously in her book, Beyond Behavior, Mona says here that a child's brain and body learn best to regulate emotions through loving interactions with adults who notice a child's emotional state and provide individually attuned interactions to help a child feel better. There is so much we can do to provide cues of safety through our relationships that can really help support kids better. So in an hour, I could talk about this for many hours. In an hour, I tried to give you a little bit of an overview of, why kids are being misunderstood, what the impact of that is, and, how we can look through brain science and see things differently. Certainly, the beginning of a deeper journey would be my hope. As I mentioned, I am a parent. I started the Alliance 5 years ago. I'm a huge proponent of work to really create better environments for our kids, our teachers, and our staff. What are some of the next steps? I've mentioned a couple books already. There are great books out there. The Whole Brain Child by Dan Siegel, Beyond Behaviors by Mona Delahooke. Friend Ginger Healy wrote this great book recently, Regulation and Co-Regulation, Accessible Neuroscience. There's a lot of great resources out there, a lot of things that you can learn more about all of this. We always recommend, trying to collaborate with your schools and your systems. Change is not easy, and systems are particularly resistant to change. And I've worked with, schools myself, and I've worked with families who have worked with schools. And, sometimes you find really receptive partners, and they're willing to look at different training. They're looking to evolve, and sometimes they're not. And those both need attention. I also recommend that you advocate for change. The more you learn about how we can better support our kids and our students and ourselves, it's important that we work to change systems and create better systems that ultimately are going to better serve individuals moving forward. So with that, kind of my take-home message here is that when we change our perspective, based on neuroscience, we can do better. We can do better for kids with disabilities. And of course, doing better for our children also leads to better outcomes for teachers and staff. We found that schools that, for instance, eliminate seclusion and reduce restraint are able to increase teacher satisfaction, decrease staff turnover, and create safer environments. Changing our lens, our words, and our actions can really help lead to better outcomes and reduce the use of a lot of the punitive approaches that are leading kids down that school to prison pipeline. And again, this is really about doing better for all, and including parents, because when we begin to make some of these changes, we're going to improve situations not only at school, but hopefully at home and other settings as well. So with that, I want to thank you for the opportunity to come here and chat with you today. I will leave you with my contact information, and always welcome people to reach out. My email address is here, our website, nseclusion.org. And of course, we're on social media as well. So feel free to reach out. And I know we might have some time for questions. I do want to just again, thank you. There's a QR code here on this last slide, and that'll actually lead you to the slide deck. If you want to go back and take a look at that, you're welcome to. And I can also make that available to the organizers. So with that, I want to thank everybody for their time, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen here in just a moment, and I'll hand it back over to the organizers.
Thank you so much, Guy. So that was very educational and informative to all of us. Let's get to some questions. Do we have any in-person attendees who have questions? We will give the microphone over. Guy, you can hear us, right?
Yes, I can. Yep.
Okay, here you go.
Hi, my name is Kathleen O'Brien. I'm a parent of a son who's 13 with autism, and so much of what you said really made so much sense to me. So I just want to say thank you so much for all your advocacy. One thing though that I wanted to mention that I shook my head no to just was my son tends to elope, but it's not, certainly not. I'm sure there are times where he's eloping to escape a situation that is negative, but a lot of the time he's eloping to get to something that he wants, like a fountain. So for example, like if we're at the beach, he elopes. It's not because he wants to be away from his mom at the beach, it's that he wants to get to that fountain that he remembered from the year before that I didn't even remember was there, or something like that. So I just wanted to mention that as like for every parent here, like, you know, you have to think about your own kid. It might, certain things their behaviors might be something different from what and it's not, nobody fits all the requirements. But anyway, other than that, that was just like one thing I wanted to mention, because my son's elopement is like on his IEP and everything else, but like it's not always, he is definitely sometimes eloping for that reason, but other times it's I think more driven to the thing that he wants, as opposed to he wants to get out of the certain situation that he's in.
Sure. Yeah, no, and I appreciate that point, and you're absolutely right. I mean, there are, I think there was a famous saying: you meet one child with autism, you met one child with autism. Every situation is different. Elopement can be a response to stress. It can be a response to not feeling safe, but certainly that doesn't mean that every situation would be like that. So yeah, I think it's a great point.
Okay, another question.
Good morning. My name is Wanda Yvette. My daughter Alexa, she's 17, and even though she has profound autism, this question perhaps does not have to do with that much, but I read recently an article that it says navigating pathological demand avoidance, PDA, in autism and ADHD. And I find it very curious because she's in a self-contained classroom, 6 to 1 students in there. But I realized that in the community school where her school is co-located at, the children's behavior tend to be a lot worse than our children with disabilities. And we constantly see the teachers telling them and repeating every single time, and they never tend to listen. I don't have that issue with my daughter. So I found that very, very curious. Thank you for your time. And your presentation was magnificent. Thank you.
Thank you. And I appreciate your comment, and just would mention to you, since you mentioned PDA, PDA is a pathological demand avoidance, kind of a newer profile that is used in autism and not widely adopted here in the United States. Kind of began in the UK. Anyway, there's more that's being written and said about PDA now, and I mentioned in the beginning, but I sit on the board of a group called PDA North America, which is a fantastic organization that has a lot of tremendous resources, because one of the things that we're finding is that because PDA is not as well recognized here in the United States, a lot of parents have a really high challenge to educate others on what PDA is. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that might be a good resource for you as well. But thank you for sharing your experience.
Another in-person question. Here you go.
So first, I just want to thank you for your presentation. It was very informative. And it brought me back to a lot of experiences with my son where sometimes we didn't understand the underlying cause of the behavior. And then now listening to the presentation and just digesting the information, like key points of him saying, "Oh, mom, it's too noisy in here," or, the kids, they don't follow the rules and it's really distracting. And sometimes I think we can like overlook how big of a deal that may be to someone who may be overstimulated by children who are getting up, not following the rules, constantly need to be redirected. So the information was very helpful in terms of like understanding the stress response that can come from a situation where things that bother someone that don't typically bother people can just be like too overwhelming. And then my follow-up question was, because of how informative it is, I saw that you were Maryland based in the beginning. The presentations that you give, is it something that would be like available to like New York City public schools? Like if a school wanted to like present it to a PTA or,
Sure. Yeah.
parent.
Yeah, so two things, and let me start with the first one. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing kind of your experience, and really again highly recommend Mona Delahook's work Beyond Behaviors. Dr. Stuart Shanker has a great book called Self-Reg as well that might be of interest to you. But we all have stressors. And those stressors can affect us in a way that under enough stress, we can all kind of flip our lid, right? We can all become dysregulated. Many individuals, autistic individuals, neurodivergent individuals, may be sensitive to stressors that others are not sensitive to. My son, he would hear the buzzing of the air conditioner, 4 rooms down the hallway, and that would be a stressor for him. Stressors can impact our ability to stay regulated. So stressors pile up, right? And stressors can come kind of in different domains. There's physical stressors, there's, emotional stressors, there's social stressors. But those stressors, as they pile up, sometimes are unseen. People don't really know that those are piling up. So when a child suddenly becomes dysregulated, people are like, it came out of nowhere. Well, in fact, often it comes out of somewhere, and it comes out of somewhere that has been kind of a collection of various stressors. It can come from demands. Demands can be stressors as well. So digging deeper, I'm always a big fan of like digging deeper and really trying to get to the true why. I have a colleague I've been working with for many years, who her name's Connie Persick. She developed something called the Y Toolkit. And the Y Toolkit is this kind of reframed functional behavioral assessment. And what's reframed about it is it's really trying to get to the far deeper why. Many behavior assessments only get to a very shallow level of this is what happened 30 seconds before the behavior. There's often so much more that's going on beneath behavior. So I appreciate you sharing that, and you're absolutely right. There's much that's below the behavior. Behavior is the iceberg. There's a lot that's below it. So to your second question, so yeah, I'm always available to do, we do training for school districts, we do presentations, community organizations, across the country, and even I've done some in Canada as well. Always happy to be connected with people that are would like to do a presentation or do some training or any of that as well. And we're also working on some bigger initiatives that will actually be rolling out to schools. Even though we're a very small little nonprofit, we've got a big initiative right now that's going to be rolling out to schools across the country through a partnership that we've done with Crisis Prevention Institute. So there's more coming in that vein as well.
Have any virtual questions?
We do. So, Guy, I have a few questions coming in from people virtually. First is it illegal to punish those with special needs for acting up when they may be actually doing certain things to relieve stress, like such as vocal sounds? So just to repeat the question, is it illegal to punish those with special needs for acting up?
Yeah. So, of course, one of the challenges here, and I realize we're in New York, and I'm not super well versed in all New York law, but one of the challenges here is that the laws often vary from state to state. Certainly there are laws around discipline, across the country. Whether or not it would be something on the books specific to what you're saying, I kind of kind of doubt it. But I mean, you could see that through the manifestation determination. So if you're seeing, assuming your child has an IEP, and let's say your child was being suspended and you reached a certain number of suspensions that required a manifestation determination to basically say, is this a function of the disability? Certainly, I mean, certainly in practice, schools should not be punishing kids for things that are manifestations of their disability. So, I mean, it would be terrible practice to be doing that. And quite honestly, I mean, I come from a mindset of really supporting individual differences. I come from a mindset of I don't believe the goal with an autistic individual or somebody that's neurodivergent is to make them be more neurotypical. I happen to believe that, for instance, let's say someone flaps their hands, and that's a way for them to relieve some stress. And we're trying to stop them because we don't want them to do it because why? Well, because it makes people feel uncomfortable. That's not a good reason. I think a lot of what people pathologize, and that's part of why we had to change our mindset around this. Sometimes we pathologize things that are actually serving a valid function for an individual. So certainly it would be terrible practice to do that. That's not the intent of federal law. The intent of federal law would not be to punish people for manifestations of their disability. But I don't know specifically state laws, and others here may have an idea of what's in New York, but I don't know anything off the top of my head.
Okay, next virtual question is, how can school counselors help students with autism?
So first of all, school counselors are some of my favorite people. Counselors are often people that are, some of the most caring people that you'll find in schools. I think, when it comes to counselor, I mean, it's a broad question. There's probably a lot that we could say. I would say that if you're a counselor, how do we look for better ways of supporting the students that you serve? If you're in a system that is overly punitive, how might you, as a counselor, impact system change? I work with a lot of educators, and I speak often at education events, and we have many educators that are teachers, therapists, counselors, social workers, et cetera, who are within systems that they're trying to help bring about change. And that's not always an easy task. Systems are resistant to change, but we kind of talk about the need for kind of these disruptors, people to help disrupt systems that aren't working. So on a small scale, I think as a counselor, being more aware about, kind of the fact that a lot of our behavior is not intentional in anyone, but certainly when we're supporting autistic students, being aware of kind of behavior and kind of the basis of it in terms of the science, and changing kind of approaches that you might be taking individually. But I would say that the bigger challenge is, if you're someone that begins to really get interested in some of this work, there's some great programs out there. I work with a woman named Dr. Lori Desautel, who is a professor at Butler University, who teaches a program in applied educational neuroscience. This is kind of how do we take this knowledge of the brain and bring it into classrooms to better support neurodivergent students, better support autistic students, ultimately better support all students. I happen to be a big proponent for things that actually improve things for everyone when we can do that as well. So I would say, looking at opportunities for direct support and how you might, let trauma-informed and neuroscience-aligned approaches guide the work that you're doing, but also thinking about opportunities that you might have to bring change in within a system. Something as simple as getting a book study in your school with other counselors or other educators, and maybe doing, Mona Hook's book or one of Ross Green's books, helping to bring about change can be a really powerful thing.
Great. Another question is, how can we tap into your colleagues' Y toolkit?
Oh,
The
okay.
toolkit you mentioned.
Yeah, and I can provide the link is actually I can provide the link in the chat if that would be helpful. Her name is Connie Persick, and her company is Supportable Solutions. And I am a big fan of Connie's work. It's funny, I met Connie because she was in the Applied Educational Neuroscience program. I came there as a guest lecturer to the program, and she's one of the people that was in the program that I've connected with many now. And she just does some really amazing work. But her company is called Supportable Solutions. And if you Google Supportable Solutions, I'm sure you will find her. The Y Toolkit, though, is a really powerful tool because I'll be honest with you, although functional behavioral assessments are a tool that are out there to help people understand behaviors and develop plans, in my experience, many of the plans that come from functional behavioral assessments aren't really doing what they need to do. They're very often putting all of the weight of change on a child who has the least skill and ability. And often, really what we need to do is focus on what do we need to change about the environment or the support or the adult staff. How do we develop a plan that really understands the deeper why of behavior? So supportablesolutions.com, I believe, is the website, and maybe somebody could put that into the chat as well. But I would highly recommend you reach out if you're interested. She's been making it available to districts throughout the country.
Okay, great. So the last question that I have is just someone saying, thank you. I have the research to prove that my 5-year-old has been misunderstood by her family and friends. I've been told that all she needs is to be physically punished because she knows what she is doing and her intent is to get what she wants. I know deep within me that she does not mean to act out or get what she wants. There is something wrong in the way she is processing the world around her. What are your thoughts on how I can help her?
Yeah. Well, by acknowledging what you just acknowledged, I mean, it sounds like you already instinctually were in the right place. You already were concerned, and I get it. You know, a lot of these ideas that we have around behavior have been around for a long time, and really, when you look at the science, you're like, it's absurd that we have these expectations of kids. So our adult expectations are very often out of line with really what we know now about development, about the brain, and about behavior. So I would say continuing to, go on the journey yourself and try to bring people along. As a parent, one of the books I really love a lot, and I've mentioned Dr. Mona Delahooke's work. Certainly go look up Dr. Mona Delahooke. She is a friend, a colleague, someone that has done some amazing work. She also wrote a book called Brain Body Parenting. And Brain Body Parenting kind of really dives into how, as a parent, you can apply some of these ideas and shift away from some of these approaches that, in fact, are causing a lot of harm. Kids that are over disciplined, whether at school or at home, often are on the long end of a lot of significant trauma and an increase, not a decrease, in behaviors that are going to increase in amplitude. When kids are kind of victims of trauma and significant trauma and being over disciplined, over punished, these are kids that will become disengaged. These are kids that are more likely to end up addicted to drugs or alcohol, more likely to end up trying to dampen some of the trauma through other means. So it sounds to me like you're somebody that kind of gets this, but it's hard. It's hard because people have a lot of assumptions based on a lot of years of ideas that are turning out not to hold water anymore. And it's hard for people to shift as well. But continue on that journey. Be curious, ask questions, continue to do research.
I have one more that just came in. So
Sure.
this is from a social worker, and they're saying, how can social workers that work with parents of children with autism begin to help support parents that are overwhelmed with behavior concerns?
Yeah, great question. And again, social workers are some of my favorite people. So thank you for the work that you do. So, this is a shift that not only needs to happen in our systems, but also, today there's still a lot of ideas around parenting that are still very grounded in a lot of ideas that are very compliance focused, very reward and consequence focused. And there are certainly better approaches and programs out there. I mentioned previously Mona's book, Brain Body Parenting. I think thinking about educational opportunities for your parents and families, anything we can do, and this might be something that you collaborate with an organization such as this one or a parent training center, looking for ways that we might be able to bring more of this kind of training that might be accessible to parents and families, I think is helpful. Recommending a book can certainly be helpful as well. But I think that if you're able to put into practice some of the things that work in a school, sometimes these things happen one way or the other. A parent becomes aware of better ways of supporting their kid, and they bring those things to the school. And sometimes the school is receptive and begins to do those things. We see that a lot with Ross Green's work, Collaborative Proactive Solutions, where parents might learn about his work and they find that it's very effective in helping them to look at and respond to behavior differently. They bring it to the school, and we find schools that are receptive, and suddenly we have a team working together, both inside of the school and outside. But it can work the other way as well. So if you're a school and you begin to do things that are working to support a kid, bringing those things back to the parent, might be helpful to the parent in helping them to shift in a different direction. But I think collaboration is key. I think one of the things that always concerns me is when I see blame on any side, whether it's, parents that, and trust me, I've been in places where things have not gone so well, but we're far better off when we can kind of work together, collaborate, and try to bring solutions that will work to support a child better in all situations. And feel free to reach out as well. As a social worker trying to bring change to your, school or system, always welcome a conversation.
Right. So on behalf of everyone at YAI, thank you all for attending today's conference, and this concludes the virtual portion of today's event. A special shout out to all of our presenters. Thank you for sharing your experience and expertise with us. I'm sure you will all agree that hearing the various perspectives today will help us all to advocate and advance autism advocacy in schools. As I mentioned earlier, please complete the feedback survey that was posted in the chat, and in-person attendees can scan the QR codes on the tables. You just might inspire next year's lineup of speakers. Please be sure to reach out to YI Link if you have questions about YI services, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everybody.
And for our in-person attendees, lunch